My name is T. James Reagan, and this is the T. James Reagan Podcast, a post-Empire podcast about literature and pop culture recorded in Newark, New Jersey. I'm a novelist, and I have like 8 or 9 books that you can buy on Amazon, so if you like this podcast, then probably check out Empire Waste because it's about a guy with a complicated personal relationship and he's obsessed with creating, but instead of an architect guy, he works in the fashion industry. So he's a fashion designer. But enough of that. I'm not trying to sell you something. I am trying to sell you something, and that is a ticket to Megalopolis while it's still in theaters. I wrote this, what you're about to hear, in the parking lot of the AMC theaters in West Orange, New Jersey. I had just gotten out of a Friday 6:30 showing of Megalopolis on its opening weekend. These observations are going to be a mix of my written podcasts where, you know how I always rip off Bret Easton Ellis on everything? I'm ripping him off for this as well. But then it's also a bit of the word vomit streams where you remember when I did Bradley Cooper's Maestro or Sofia Coppola's Priscilla. Yes, I reviewed Sofia before her father on here. And after Megalopolis, I think I actually did it in the right order. I did it in the order that Francis would want me to, but maybe not for the reasons you'd think. And I say all this because, full disclosure, if you're expecting some sort of accurate summary of this film, you won't receive this here. I'm incapable of writing outside of my own experience, and the way I perceive things is not how everyone else perceives them. The things you love bring me misery, and the things that bring you misery, I love. I think it's just being a contrarian, but it's how my brain is wired. And also, I am very dumb. Like, I don't know anything about history. I don't even know what year Rome was. Like, I know the Christ calendar, but beyond that, I don't know a whole lot about Rome. If I'm saying something about Rome, it's because someone else probably told me this. So I just don't want you to think that you're getting some sort of like, here's a full historical context of how old Rome and new Rome interact with each other. No. I showed up for this movie for Shia LaBeouf. That's the metric that you can go by of what you're about to get here. And honestly, if I was going to do an intellectual breakdown on this, it would be how Megalopolis relates to the work of Ayn Rand, because I'm a Rand head hardcore. It's all I ever want to talk about, and no one wants to talk about it with me. Like, I'm already unfuckable, so I'm not going to go into that. Unless you want me to. All it's going to take is one DM, and I'll be like, oh, okay, yep, I will record it. And I'll spend 5 hours of my life doing that. And the reason why I'm doing this is because, to be short and sweet, which I am, Megalopolis is one of the major works of post-Empire America. Love it or hate it, baby. It's just a fact. And to be not short and a little bitter, since this is a film about building complicated structures, I'm going to at least put some architecture to this. So if you haven't seen Megalopolis, I want to give you a bit of guidance on that. Or if you're like one of the many people in the theater I was in and you walked out, I would like to show you why you need to walk back in. We'll just call it an intermission. You took a very long intermission. You took a 72-hour intermission. And now you can go back. It's still in theaters. You can do it. Okay. Let's put some Roman pillars in here. What were they? They were like Doric pillars, Ionic, and Corinthian. Is that right? Is that right? There's probably like type of clouds or whatever. Cumulus, nimbus. I'm so dumb. And maybe that's why I love this movie so much. Anyways, our protagonist, the first pillar, the main pillar, the weight-bearing pillar, our protagonist is Caesar Catalina, and he's played by Adam Driver. He's an architect, but he's also more than that. He's a member of an extremely powerful family, one of 2 powerful families that Megalopolis focuses on. And Caesar right now is a sensation because he created a new building material that will not crumble as it ages. This material is how he will build Megalopolis. And our love interest, another pillar in Megalopolis, is Julia Cicero. And she's played by Natalie Emmanuel. Julia is a socialite, but she also has abilities that no one else can see. At least not to begin with. And she's a member of the other powerful family that Megalopolis follows, the Ciceros. Which brings us to another pillar, our antagonist, Mayor Franklin Cicero. And he's played by Giancarlo Esposito. Giancarlo? Is Giancarlo a classic Italian name? And he's Julia's father and the mayor of New Rome. And I listed those two attributes in priority for him. He used to be a prosecutor and then became mayor. And Mayor Franklin Cicero, or maybe I should call him Francis, not yet. But he's married to his longtime wife, Teresa, who's played by a very old and very fragile-looking Catherine Hunter. Like, when I looked up her Wikipedia and saw she was only 67 years old, I literally called my parents because they're around that age, and I don't want them to be as old as Catherine Hunter looks in this movie. Like, she makes late-era Joan Didion look like Caitlin Clark. She looks old. And the right-hand man for the mayor is Jason Zanders, who's played by Jason Schwartzman. And, I mean, this continues Schwartzman's incredible recent run, where he sort of waxes and wanes. Like, his career has these really big heights where he's doing, like, this great creative work, and then he just disappears back down into, like, he's like a Sam Rockwell, you know? Where it's like, this guy is the guy. But if you haven't seen his work in Asteroid City, like, I can't suggest it enough. There's one of my favorite scenes in recent film. There's this black and white segment where Schwartzman's character loses the plot. And he encounters an old love on a balcony, and it's snowing, and it's just beautiful, and it's pure cinema. And you know how the internet is always saying, like, oh, Wes Anderson, he's just repeating himself, blah, blah, blah. But then he puts together a scene, like this scene in Asteroid City, and it's like, Wes, keep repeating yourself forever. Please, like, don't try anything else. We need whatever this is, because it's exactly what I came to this movie for. And I know what you're thinking. You're saying, since Jason's here, surely Nick Cage Coppola must be in this batshit crazy film, right? Like, there has never been a more Nick Cage coded film, surely. And yet, he's not in this movie. I kept waiting for it. I was like, oh, he's going to do an uncredited guest appearance. He's going to show up there and it's going to be Cage time. But it didn't happen. Like, I mean, he must have showed up at the set. He's standing there and, like, security stops him and he has to be like, let me in now. It can be nice. Make me go now, and I'll come back. Not once, not twice, but as many times as I like. You guys see that movie? If you haven't seen that movie, that was the most Megalopolis moment of the podcast. If you haven't seen that movie, and that movie that I'm referring to is Long Legs. And yes, if you follow me on Letterboxd, you noticed I didn't review it, but I did like what Oz did with it. However, because it's satanic, you don't get a review. I'm sorry, that you don't get a review on Letterboxd if you make a satanic movie. That's why Robert Eggers, The Witch, you're never getting a Letterboxd star rating. I'm sorry. You're going to sit there on Watched. You won't even get a star rating. And I bet in the scheme of things, you would have gotten a really good star rating if you weren't so satanic. But on from most unhinged potential performance to the most hinged performance is Dustin Hoffman, who, this character might be anti-Semitic, but He plays the right-hand man to Mayor Cicero, who's like a fixer, and his name is Nush Berman. And Nush is someone who wants to like continue doing things the way that they're currently done. You know, traditional bricks and steel. We need to take care of the people right now. We're not going to get into this wacky megalopolis stuff. We're going to build how we've always built. And if someone's going to stand in the way, we're going to build a mechanism to take you down. And then let's go back to unhinged performances. Our femme fatale in this film is named Wow Platinum. And I guess the story behind this is that Francis Ford Coppola met some chick who was like, my great grandma is so fucking hot. When people see her, they just say, wow. And so her name became Wow, because every fucking person who saw her was like, wow, that bitch is hot. And then I guess like Francis saw a picture and he was like, wow. And then so now, like, you gotta name a character Wow. If you've been given this portal into hot girl shit, you know, you gotta go for Wow. And then the platinum is just a little extra sheen on it, you know? And you would think like, okay, that's like a platinum record or whatever. But then you look at the color palette and everything is gold. And then Wow Platinum, like platinum's supposed to be better than gold, but then Megalon is gold too. So you go like gold, platinum, Megalon. You know, we're building on the building materials here. But anyways, Wow is a morally corrupt journalist, or by 2024 election year standards, she's the least corrupt journalist that we have working. And she isn't just eye candy. She isn't just a, like, let's set up a bunch of characters. Like, she is the siren leading everything to the rocks. Like, she starts as Caesar's situationship and fucks her way up the family tree, and she ends up as so much more. Like, I think you can tell by how wowed I am by her that I'm going to be talking about her a lot. Like, Aubrey Plaza is on one. And, all right, now that I'm excited, we can talk about our antagonist light, Claudio Pulcher. And he is played by none other than the T. James Reagan podcast first ballot Hall of Famer, Shia LaBeouf. And Shia, if you're listening, I still have that play on my hard drive. You know, no rush, but it's still there. And also, if this is the first time you've listened to one of my podcasts, go back and listen to the post-Empire Shia LaBeouf pod. And it needs a part 2, but I also feel like Shia's in this portion of his life where he's just trying to do his normal guy existence, and I'm sensitive about like discussing him in ways he's been discussed since he was like a literal child. So I've tabled the part 2 until I sort of have a way of satisfying my creative needs while also treating him like a person and not just like being as weird as I have a tendency to be. Like, I just sang the Long Legs song in a podcast that has never had a guest on it and has only been me. So there's no one to be like, hey, you broke into the Long Legs song right in the beginning there. Like, who do you think is listening to this? And why do you think they're listening to it? Like, I don't have a producer to ask me that. Like, the guy who I'm ripping off, Bret Easton Ellis, he has a producer who will, like, chime in and at least be another human being in the room. I have no other human beings in the room. All I have is my neighbor who can hear this through the wall. And he hasn't banged on the wall yet, and I thank him for his patience. But all this to say, it's like, oh, man. I've been listening to that Taylor Swift and Post Malone song. All of this to say, I hope that you're okay, but you're the reason. I'm balancing that out for the... I scared the hose with the Long Legs, so I gotta sing the Taylor Swift to get him back into the fold here. Anyways, Shia is important to me. And so, along with Francis Ford Coppola, he's the reason why I immediately left work on Friday, drove to West Orange, bought my non-alcoholic beers that I'm now drinking, which is a long story on that Don't worry, I haven't been arrested. You know, I mean, I would be the belle of the ball. I would, if I was arrested, I would show up there like Carrie before they dumped the blood on her. You know, they would vote me prom queen immediately. But I haven't been arrested. I'm just it's called Operation Fitzgerald, where basically I just don't kill myself. Anyways, I showed up there because of Shia LaBeouf. And Claudio in Megalopolis is Caesar's cousin. Often on screen, he appears in drag and has like the most polycule living haircut I've ever seen. But don't worry, Wow Platinum will take care of that in due time. It's like the reverse Samson, where they cut off his polycule Australian guy mullet and he gets more powerful. I gotta just keep going here. This cast list is not small and I have more introductions. I mean, like, Claudio has a sister who is like mostly comic relief, but then there's also like these things where they allude to that she might be banging Claudio. And when you see Claudio's like Twitter activist haircut, you're like, of course, sexually, that's where he's at. I mean, he's not hiding his proclivities. He's putting them on Front Street. Like, every Twitter user who looks like that, you're just waiting. You know, they're gonna show up in jail before I ever do. But in that family tree, the patriarch of both Shia and Adam's characters and that weird incestuous sister, they all, the patriarch is Hamilton Crassus III, played by John Voight. And Hamilton controls like the purse strings of this crumbling empire, and he's surrounded by people who want to yank on those strings and pull that purse away. Or, you know, suck on those strings, because in the case of Wow Platinum, she's oral as hell. And on the other side, we have the matriarch of the family, and she is Constance Crassus Catalina, and she's played by Talia Shire. And Constance has a complicated relationship with her son in the fact that she often makes illusions that she wishes he didn't exist and feels like she's going to be replaced by him at any moment. She's like the devouring mother incarnate. But she's also pretty funny. Like, it's a pretty funny performance. I got to give it up to Talia. She is, makes me laugh. And then, guiding us through all this, our humble narrator is Fundy Romaine, and he's played by Lawrence Fishburne. And Fundy drives Caesar around New Rome, and he gives us narration throughout the film. And at one particularly fun point, Fundy, the character, comments on Lawrence Fishburne's narration. You know, it's like that kind of movie. And in the post-Empire world where everything is meta and everything is a hat on a hat and reaction channels are more popular than the media they're reacting to, it's like such a perfect critique. And this came from a dude who's in his 80s. Like, Francis Ford Coppola is 80-something years old. Like, I don't have the Wikipedia in front of me right now, but he's old as fuck. Like, that's just what it says on the Wikipedia. They were like, this guy has seen it all. And then he's still cued in here where the narrator is commenting on the narration in character. And, you know, it's just incredible. And also commenting on the now is our chaste trad wife virgin Vesta Sweetwater, played by Grace Canderwall. I guess she was on like America's Got Talent or something like that. I don't know. She's very pretty. Whatever she was on, like, she gained a Spotify listener from this movie because I like her music too. Even if she was like physically disgusting, like Chappell Roan, I would still listen to Grace Canderwall. But like, I mean, your last name, change it. But so in this movie, she is a beautiful face songstress who is the Vestal Virgin of our new empire. She is going to lead us into the new age. And she's going to lead us purely into the new age, if everything goes as planned. I know that's a lot to keep all in your mind at once, but trust me, that is the easiest explanation I can give for each of these people. I mean, maybe I didn't have to sing Fortnite in the middle of that. It could have been an easier explanation if I wasn't belting out Taylor Swift. But this is me. Take it or leave it. And all of this was put together by our writer, director, producer, and primary funder of the film, Francis Ford Coppola. Since everyone knows Francis and his work speaks for itself, I'll give you my history with him and why I'm such a fan. My introduction to Francis's work is a little different in that when I was a kid, I started to want to read grown-up novels, and like the first grown-up novel I found in the Marcellus Public Library was Mario Puzo's The Godfather. And I took it out of the library before a vacation to Virginia, where like I went to one of those towns where the people pretend to be like trad wives when we like first settled in America. And since I didn't have any literature to put it up against, I was shocked that the Marcellus Library carried and loaned me a novel where like there's a subplot of a cavernous pussy. I was like, this is like contraband. Why did you give this to a child? you know how everyone's like talking about book bans now? Maybe you shouldn't be giving an 11-year-old a book about like a cavernous pussy. But I don't know. Or maybe I'm a prude. Maybe I am the Grace Canderwall Vestal Virgin, where I'm like, oh, my pure ears. I can't read this. I can't read about Sonny's cock for 2 chapters. But, you know, as I sat by the pool and I read this book, I genuinely thought I was like holding one of the great American novels. I was like, this is Ernest Hemingway. This is like Moby Dick. This is the pinnacle of writing, because I just had nothing to put it up against, you know? I was like, if you compare this to Goosebumps, Mario Puzo is the greatest living. He's Roberto Bolaño. And so it made a huge impact on me. And since The Godfather was rated R, I had to wait until one of my friends acquired it on a massive 2 VHS stack. Yes, I am that old. That's like a Francis Ford Coppola story where he's like, when I went to the movie palace to watch, you know, it's just a story that instantly dates you. It's like, oh, you rode a dinosaur to the movies. But anyways, once we got a hold of that 2 VHS stack and we watched The Godfather, we did what any logical teens would do. And of course we sought out Brian De Palma's Scarface, because if you go to any fair and you can like win a poster with that, darts hitting balloons game, there's always like a Godfather poster and the Scarface poster. And so we were like, oh, that was our letterboxed back then, was just the state fair carnival games. And so we watched Scarface, and of course, we thought that we were watching Citizen Kane. We had no other context for it. We were like, compared to The Land Before Time, Scarface is the greatest movie ever made. And after that, we went on to The Godfather Part 2, and after The Godfather Part 2, once again, I took another logical leap and watched every single Woody Allen, Diane Keaton movie. I was in love with Diane Keaton. Because, like, as a guy with a big nose where I was like, oh, she's so sweet to Al Pacino. And I sought her out, and I found her in Woody Allen movies where she is a literal, like, ray of sunshine, like, manic pixie dream girl, but Diane Keaton is playing Diane Keaton, and it's just, oh, I could watch her forever. Like, sometime in 2025, I've planned this 2-parter. And it's called Angels and Demons, where the first podcast is going to be called Angels, and I'm going to review all the Diane Keaton Woody movies. And then the second podcast is going to be called Demons, and I'm going to review all the Mia Farrow Woody movies. So look out for that. After I finished all the Diane Keaton Woody Allen movies, I watched The Godfather 3, and that's where I first laid eyes on my precious baby, Sofia Coppola. Her face is just, it's like a painting to me. I could look at Sofia Coppola's face. I think I did this in my Priscilla review as well. And I'm never going to beat the misogyny accusations where it's like, hey, when you reviewed Priscilla, you just talked about the director's face for 32 minutes. And then when you reviewed Francis Ford Coppola's movie, you literally just said he's old as fuck and rode a dinosaur to the theater. And so if that's misogyny, then you got me dead to rights. I'm never going to get out of it. I'm trapped there. Anyways, after Godfather Part 3, I moved on to Apocalypse Now. And I didn't get it. I was too young. But I also got the Brando part because I was a huge Brando guy. I was, when a young guy is forced in English class to watch Streetcar, it blows his mind. You're never going to be Brando in Streetcar, but you're always going to want to be Brando in Streetcar. So I thought the end was incredible, but there was so much going on in Apocalypse Now, and I didn't have the, this was pre 9/11, so I didn't know my entire generation was going to go to war, and so I didn't have any context for all the Vietnam stuff. And on my first watch, I just wasn't as immersed as I would be now watching the one of 9,000 cuts that I've downloaded onto my laptop, where I was like, all right, someone else recut it again. Okay, someone else recut it and replaced all the music with The Doors or something like that. Like, they just keep making this movie over and over and over again. But also, other people keep making this movie over and over and over again. Like, one of my great pre-COVID film experiences was going to see James Gray's Ad Astra. When I watched that movie, because Brad Pitt's voice, my favorite movie of all time is Curious Case of Benjamin Button. And Brad Pitt's voice does something to me. When James Gray took Apocalypse Now and put it in space and made Tommy Lee Jones his Brando, and Liv Tyler was the wife, you can just lust after Liv Tyler infinitely. You can be a million miles away from Earth, and she's your motivation to get back. And so, Apocalypse Now becomes a better movie because of Ad Astra, not because Ad Astra is an inferior movie, but because Ad Astra is now in play with Apocalypse Now, and it's a dialogue, and two great filmmakers. One is speaking to the past, but he's also creating a future. Like that scene where Brad goes into the obscenely soundproofed room. Whoever made that room, relax. No wonder people are always complaining about NASA budgets, where they're like, we need to make the most soundproof room ever. What are we going to use it for? Oh, Brad Pitt's just going to read a letter to Tommy Lee Jones. So I feel like he could do that on his iPhone. Yeah, he totally could, but Tommy Lee Jones is an audiophile. If he listens to this on his headphones and Brad Pitt sounds a little distorted, there's no fucking way we'll ever find him again. We need pristine quality for him to listen to this message. If Tommy Lee Jones heard how many times my audio peaks out and how many pops I do on this thing, he would blow up Mars in anger. I need to get back to Megalopolis. This is why it's so impressive that Francis told this entire story in 2 hours and 30 minutes. I don't think I'm going to be able to get through this podcast in that amount of time. And you say, oh, Tommy, I think you're overselling that. Put on my Babylon podcast, which is longer than the runtime of Babylon. And Babylon is this is watching Damien suck his own dick. My dick sucking is even longer than Damien's dick sucking. So, that should tell you a little something about my hubris. And maybe that's why Apocalypse Now and Ad Astra appeals to me so much. All of this to say, don't sing Taylor. Don't sing Taylor. The ambition is what gets me. The ambition of Apocalypse Now. When you watch that documentary, you watch a guy losing his mind in the jungle, making a film about a guy losing his mind in the jungle. Now that I've tried to get some of my scripts off the ground, and there are these conversations that just die, where people are really excited and they read the script and they tell you it's a good script, and then the conversation ends because you don't have the right people attached and you don't have the money attached, and there's disagreements on how the script needs to change and how it can adapt, and if there's a movie that's sort of like the movie that you wrote that's really popular, and then now they don't want to move forward with that because the movie that you sort of have a similarity to kind of bombed, and so you're gonna bomb if you put out a similar product in that market. And they had a starring guy who was an A-list actor, and then if it can't be done with an A-list actor, how are they going to do it with the B-list actor that you're looking at? And all of it is soul crushing. And so when you look at Francis, you always see ambition. And like I said, I'm always stealing from Bret Easton Ellis, and he had Sam Wasson on, friend of Bret and friend of my other big inspiration, Bruce Wagner. And Sam Wasson wrote a whole book about Francis when his studio, American Zoetrope, when he was making One for the Heart. And the stories that he tells there are, you couldn't write a satire. Like David Mamet couldn't write the actual things that happened at American Zoetrope. It boggles the mind in the good way and the bad way. But ambition, ambition, ambition. You're going to hear me repeat this hundreds of times for the rest of this pod, and it's not just because I have a limited vocabulary, which I do have a limited vocabulary. I'm a dumb guy. We've established this. The way I came back to Francis after, because I think he did Jack, and he did some, One for Me, Three for You type movies where he was doing a paycheck. I think he did a good Grisham novel adaptation, but just not the things I'm looking for in cinema. So the way I came back to Francis Ford Coppola was he gave my hero, Vincent Gallo, a starring movie role. Yes, the man I've made myself in the image of, upstate New York legend, Vincent Gallo, was put into Francis Ford Coppola's Tetro, and it is, for a Gallo head, this performance is top tier. This is what we know the man is capable of. This is what we love him for. This is the magnetism of seeing him on the screen. And Francis gave that to us, in beautiful black and white. Francis compelled Vincent to carry a film with this very young actor. I think it's Ansel Aldrich, who was in Nolan's wildly overrated Oppenheimer, or it was Dane DeHaan, who has, I like Dane because he has the same Facebook eyes I do. The most American of our times was in Tetro, and the way his face looks in black and white. Once again, like how I said Sophia looks like a painting, Vincent looks like a painting. That face is 101. You don't get another Vincent Gallo face for another 100 years. And because of Tetro, I said, Francis, you can make flops for the entire rest of your career, and I will buy a ticket and I'll see the movie. Admittedly, when I found out his next film was going to be a vehicle for the ingenue Elle Fanning, I was absolutely thrilled, because I was like, Elle Fanning is her. She's the girly. But then I found out it was about a novelist and it had horror elements, and I was not thrilled. The worst tweeter of all time, besides Jeff Tiedrich, is Stephen King. And Stephen King has pumped out, at this point, probably 100 different stories about a haunted novelist, and they all suck. They're all creatively bankrupt, self-sucking. Like, you want to talk about just... it's barely writing. It's such a creatively bankrupt idea that, like, when I went into this film, I was just like, sure, whatever. And the movie's called Twixt, and I don't think it's a good movie. And it doesn't... There's nothing in Twixt carries over from Tetro. It's two completely different artists at work there. And so I went and I saw Twixt, and I was like, okay, whatever. And it seemed like that film would be a very, very sad way for Francis Ford Coppola to go out. It would be like if Stephen King died after he finished writing Secret Window, Secret Garden. Twixt was like that last season of Brady on the Bucks where he looked like dog shit and they missed the playoffs. Like, you know that Lana lyric on that deeply boring song about one of the most gorgeous women of our time, Margaret Qualley, where Lana sings, "When you know, you know." Like, that's watching Twixt and seeing it. I was like, Francis, I know, man. And yet, there were always rumblings of megalopolis. And for that, I didn't fuck around. I wasn't like, when you know, you know. I was like, keep going, bro. Don't let them stop you. Run through a wall for this shit. Because the fingerprint of Ayn Rand was clear on this idea, and Rand is so deeply important to me as a writer that, like, one whiff of her work is something that appeals to me wildly. That word again, ambition. Rand's work is always full of ambition, and it's about people with ambition, and it's about building America. Like, there's this element of like sci-fi and mystery and romance and American exceptionalism that I just greedily drink up every time it's placed in front of me. My understanding of both creation and this country is so bedrocked in Rand's work that, like, for another voice even to attempt to do what she made would be exciting, but then to have Francis be the one to do it and to know that this is like potentially his final masterwork, a summation of everything he did. Megalopolis was just a white whale for not only him, but for me. Like, that's the reason why I'm recording this right now. That's why I sat in my car in the Whole Foods parking lot after... No, I guess it was maybe the ShopRite parking lot. I don't know. I only go there for the liquor store and the movie theater. I weigh like 120 pounds. I don't care about food. I'm not going to Whole Foods. I literally just survive off cans of tuna like a street cat. But all of it was so exciting to me. And so, imagine, in April 2019, an announcement was made. One day before his 80th birthday. All right, so I guess I do know how old he is. I must have looked this up while I was jotting down notes. Because on April 19th, one day before his 80th birthday. All right, so if April 19th, he was 80. And that was 6 years ago. So he's like 86. Man, that's incredible. An 86-year-old guy. Like, when you hear about the shit in this movie and you'll be like, an 86-year-old guy did this? Fucking awesome, dude. Why are you listening to this? You better be listening to this driving to the West Orange AMC right now. I don't care how far away it is. Drive to the West Orange AMC. You're going to be able to get the best seat in the house. Lord knows I did because I bought advanced screening tickets, but you don't have to buy advanced screening tickets to get the best seat in the house in the second week run of this. Let me just tell you. On April 19th, an announcement was made. Francis told Deadline that Megalopolis, a film he's been working on since 1977, is happening. Possibly with Jude Law, who would be in Adam Driver's role, and then Shia in what would be, like, even after the FKA Twigs face falling off the bone looking allegations, it still remained Shia. It was always going to be Claudio. And this loyalty alone is something that Francis should be celebrated for. And we're going to discuss that further. At the end of this podcast, I'm going to have my post-Empire view of this. The first part will just be for you normies who are clocking in here to listen to it. But then, because the way I'm putting work out into this world is always with a post-Empire lens, we're going to have that post-Empire lens, and we're going to review Shia in relation to all of this. And so the announcement was there, but the money wasn't. Like, even though streamers were throwing money at any dog shit creative could walk into Netflix and they'll be like, this is a beautiful study of racial politics in America as we know it. Like, Netflix gave money to Colin Kaepernick. Like, that's how they would just give money to anything. It was during the Trump era, and so money was like essentially free. Interest rates were so low that you could just like, it was free money and people were giving it out. And Francis took the script to them and they didn't go forward with it because they were like, actually, Colin is in the waiting room and you're a white guy, and if we make him wait for a white guy, then they'll burn the building down. So just get out of here. We need to take a meeting with him. Because that's how streaming worked in the 2015 to 2020 era. And so, to get that money, Francis had to accept a merger with the Delcato family wines, and it was like an equity deal that was huge. It was like $650 million or something like that. And with Francis's ownership stake, he was able to borrow $120 million for Megalopolis. And with that money set up, it was about casting. And Jude Law wasn't available, so he went on over to Oscar Isaac, who at the time, like, you know how Pedro Pascal isn't putting in good performances, but he's putting in all the performances all the time? Like, did you see, I think it was Pedro Almodovar's cowboy movie with Ethan Hawke? Like, Netflix paid for that, and that is a pile of shit. Like, I know how it could be like, oh, you have to fund auteurs. The gay cowboy movie is like, it's not even a perfume commercial. It's like a telenovela, but worse. And of course, Pedro Pascal showed up for that. And so that's what Oscar Isaac was around the time Francis was casting this. And so he had to say no because he was like, sorry, I'm in 140 other movies and all of them are bad. So I have 19 dog shit roles, so I can't take this. And from there, Francis moved on to Adam Driver, who chooses his projects based on director and then fits himself in the demands of the director. I mean, the greatest success I think he's had in this style is Sirax's Annette, where the performance that Driver gives in that is one of his best and one of his most underrated. I was like, perfect. The more bizarre the auteur, the better the result will be. Like, Ridley Scott is not bizarre. And that's why he shoots movies fast. Because he's like a workman. Him and, you know, like Clint Eastwood, they will get you out. Like, you won't break for lunch. You'll go home for lunch. That's just the type of director who knows exactly what he wants and keeps it on the rails. They are the most on the rails directors. And Francis is a totally off the rail director. You have no idea what your shooting day is going to look like. You have no idea how long it's going to run. And that's why Adam was such a good choice. And so with Adam in place, it was about finding a female lead. And I know he looked at a lot of different people, and he ended up doing a Zoom with Natalie Emmanuel. And I knew nothing about Natalie except for The Invitation, where I love Karen Kusama's films. And The Invitation was really good. And I was like, oh, okay, I've seen her face before. But I think Natalie Emmanuel's famous for Game of Thrones, which unfortunately like saddled us with Pedro Pascal, who I hate, and I hate dragons too. Like, every movie with dragons sucks. I've never seen a movie with dragons. Well, I sort of did like Your Highness. I don't know. It's a funny movie to me. I'm a James Franco apologist too. So I think Your Highness is a good movie. But every other movie or TV show with dragons sucks. It's awful. But the way Natalie won this role is that Coppola had her on a Zoom and he had her recite from Alice Walker's novel, The Color Purple. He had her put a different spin on what she recited each time. And the versatility that she displayed, the range she displayed, made it so that she was perfect for a film that at one point is Shakespearean dialogue and another time is just like Shia LaBeouf being like, yeah, dog, yeah, that shit was tight. You know, like, there's such a range. And you have to be able to deliver in all of these different places. Because this is not your Ridley Scott on the rails movie. It's an off the rails scene eating, and then you're quiet, and then you're loud, and then you're confused, and then you know more than the audience knows, and all of it needs to feed into this one character. And this character is our love interest. If we don't fall in love with Julia, Natalie Emmanuel, then the movie doesn't work because we don't believe that Caesar has also fallen in love with her. We don't believe that Caesar's rejuvenated by her. So she is essential. And I love her in this movie. Like, I'm not going to watch her dragon shit, but I love her in this movie, and I'm going to look for other movies that she's been in. So once Driver and Emmanuel were aboard, the foundations of this architectural wonder was established, and in 2022, there were additional cast additions, and then 2023, Giancarlo Esposito was added, and strangely enough, the podcast that I recorded before this, I still haven't put it out. I don't know why I haven't uploaded this. I guess I want to watch the movie again, but the podcast before that I recorded was on Maxine. And Maxine was the first movie I saw in the theaters in 2024, and it came out in July. And the second movie I saw in theaters is Megalopolis. And the third movie I'm going to see in theaters is Todd Phillips' Joker 2. And the only reason I'm seeing that in theaters is because I was in Joker 1. It's the only movie I've ever been in. I've only ever been on a Todd Phillips set. I'm in the riot at the end there. You know, where Joaquin's dancing on the cop car. We shot that all night in the streets of Newark, and it was one of the best nights of my life, and it was so fun. And so Todd Phillips always gets a pass from me. I'm always going to see a Todd Phillips movie. Do you guys want a podcast on Joker and Joker 2? Maybe I'll do that. I'm going to go see it, but maybe I'll wait until it comes out on streaming, because I would like to do... I have to imagine the way Todd Phillips works is he's ending this Joker as a duology. So I'll wait till it comes out on streaming, and then I'll put together a podcast episode on Joaquin Phoenix's Joker and my experience being on set, where I'll detail everything that happened. And one person, you know how it's always like one like on Facebook and I'll slide into my crush's DMs, and then like the guy likes his own Facebook post. That's what this Todd Phillips Joker thing is going to be, where like, you know, all the girls say like it's an incel movie, and then all the guys are afraid to say they like it because they don't want to be seen as incels. So I'm going to DM myself and be like, hey, Tommy, you should do that Joker podcast. And after I put out the Maxine podcast, after this podcast, and then maybe once I write one half of my Angels and Demons Woody Allen podcast, I'll put out my Joker podcast. I'm never beating the misogynist allegations, am I? Oh, I'm just digging the hole deeper. Anyways, all of this to say that you're the reason. Giancarlo Esposito. He was in the first movie I saw in theaters, and he's going to be in the second movie I saw in theaters. So Todd Phillips released the Giancarlo Esposito Joker cut before I see the movie on Tuesday, where it's $6. And I'm going to go to the SoPac. I'm not going to drive all the way out. I went to get the nice seats in the West Orange Theater, but also I had to go to Total Wine where they sell my non-alcoholic beers and I get case upon case upon case of it. I'm going to send out a tweet of the latest purchase I made there, and it's literally $90 in a non-alcoholic beer. Like, I'm a non-alcoholic at this point. I'm so pathetic. My life is so pathetic. Why are you listening to this? Of all the podcasts you could listen to about Megalopolis, I haven't summarized the plot yet. We haven't talked about this movie yet, and we're an hour into it. What are you doing? What are you doing with your life? What am I doing with my life? What are we doing with our life? Does anyone want to go see The Joker on Tuesday? But, I mean, Giancarlo Esposito doesn't get clean out of this, too, because when I went to the West Orange Theater, they played 9 hours of trailers beforehand, and one of the trailers is a Marvel movie where Giancarlo Esposito is the villain, and our hero is Black Captain America, who teams up with senile Joe Biden president Harrison Ford, and Harrison Ford becomes a red version of the Hulk. Like, anyone who is saying that Megalopolis is a bad movie, if you had to watch Giancarlo Esposito be the bad guy against Black Captain America and Joe Biden, Harrison Ford, you would be like, Megalopolis is the greatest film of all time. It's like the comparison of when I read The Godfather and I was like, this is the great American novel. Like, I don't know who John Steinbeck is, but he is licking Mario Puzo's boots. Like that. That's what it's like. If you showed Megalopolis to a Joe Biden, Harrison Ford movie, Marvel movie guy, his head would explode. And he has one of those heads that's like J.D. Vance sized, probably. Anyways, we'll save the political talking points for when we get to Claudio later on in our discussion here. And, you know, like Giancarlo Esposito, it makes sense that he's in this movie because he worked on the Cotton Club like back in like 1984 with Francis. So I liked him in Maxine. I'll talk about that in the Maxine podcast. I'm losing this, you know, like when we'll do another comparison, you'll compare this podcast to Megalopolis and you'll be like, wow, Francis has a very coherent mind compared to Tommy. We have established our cast. And so now we're in the 2020s. In 2020, that was like COVID times was a political tool where it became like a religion for the left, where it allowed them to other anyone who didn't, you know, quote unquote, like trust the science, in a science that was like constantly changing and was being like divvied out by the president whose brain was melting. You know, our Harrison Ford president was like giving us all this stuff, and we were just Giancarlo Esposito if we didn't believe in like literally everything that was happening. We were the antagonists there. You had to attend your loved ones' funerals like you were Natalie Emmanuel auditioning for Megalopolis, you know, just sitting behind a Zoom screen and being like, sorry, Grandpa, bye. And so putting on an independent production of Megalopolis's size, you had to like wait until the left decided that they were done playing authoritarianism. And that meant that like you had to wait until November of 2022 before they could declare that COVID was over. And I mean, like, have we declared COVID is over? Before I saw that terrible Marvel movie trailer, they literally played an ad in the theaters for Pfizer where, like, John Legend showed up and he was, like, sitting at a piano and he was like, unless you're married to Chrissy Teigen, you're going to want to survive COVID. So you should get the next COVID booster, the 14th booster. And then he like pulls down his suit jacket and shows that he's wearing a Band-Aid, where he's like, I don't know why I got this COVID shot, because every day of my life, I want to die. And then he just played Ordinary People or whatever his hit song is. I think Carl Thomas sang Ordinary People, but you get the point. He covered Carl Thomas, sang Ordinary People because no one knows a John Legend song. But anyways, the restrictions had lifted in November of 2022 and production began on Megalopolis in Georgia. Like, us Tetro heads, we were thrilled because Coppola announced that his collaboration with Mahi Malamare, I'm so sorry for mispronouncing your name, dude. I love your visual style, though. Like, I think the way, like, I'm just going to continue. I'm going to mispronounce this guy's name and then give him a fake backstory. But sorry, all of this is like an impromptu podcast where, you know, like, if you listen to my Sofia Coppola podcast, you know that I just ramble and I create things in my mind. But I think the way that Francis got this cinematographer was that he was like a film student, and Francis said, like, I like your eye, I will teach you how to shoot a film. Apologies if this is a total lie. You know, like, he could be like Harris Savides and one of those guys that's like hugely has a huge background on it, and I've just made up a backstory for him where I was like, yeah, he hadn't done anything until he showed up on the set for Tetro. Apologies, I am a dumb person. So I've broken the Taylor Swift song multiple times. You knew what you were getting into with this pod. But, you know, I had Francis. I had the cinematographer I love. I had Shia and Adam, and everything was putting together exactly how I needed it. We were building the dream. And, like, production went on as any Coppola production goes. Like, he's the maestro. You know how the maestro will be the one who decides the tempo of everything. And, like, there's always going to be some bitter flutist who's pissed that, like, their solo got cut from the piece, and then, like, the maestro changed the tempo at a moment's notice, and he got a new idea for the flutist, and so he gave him a different solo on short notice, and the flutist had to, like, go home and flute the entire night to figure it out, and then he had to quit because he didn't want to flute, and he's like, this is not my process, and he, you know, went to Variety, and Variety had one of their, like, sub WoW Platinum journalists. Like, could Variety hire worse journalists? It's impossible at this point. And so multiple times Coppola sent someone home to go get their fucking shine box. Like, that's how the production went. And they're like, he's smoking weed in his trailer. Like, you sound jealous. And the way he created the set was thrilling for guys like Driver, actresses like Aubrey Plaza. Talia Shire seemed to be having fun. You know, like, when's the last time she's been able to unleash like that? It just, a lot of these experiences are what you make it. Like, I keep telling people who are so politically obsessed right now, you don't have to be this politically obsessed. Like, you're allowing this to control your life. Like, this entire administration, I have no idea what they've done, and I'm sure it's been fine. My checks are still cashing. They haven't blown up the tenement apartment that I live in like Adam Driver does in Megalopolis, so at least they haven't megalopolized. I'm sure that there are things that would make me very angry that this administration has done, but I haven't looked them up. I don't Google. I'll do my Joe Biden. I don't care if they're paying their fair share or not. I don't care if billionaires aren't paying their fair share. My brain is melting. I don't understand how Rome works. I don't understand how they fell. You know? Just let the senile old man go out there and make a fool of himself. You don't have to be this pissed about politics. And at times, I'm sure later on in this podcast, you'll be like, oh, Tommy, you're getting pissed about politics. And it's only because I hate protesters. Like, that's the one thing I get pissed about. Where it's just like, how dare you stand in front of traffic? And anyone who's ever blocked traffic, I have a personal vendetta against. Other than that, do whatever you want in your life. And so, like, we're going to see this production too. Like, you shitty little Variety journalists, we aren't going to look to you. We're going to look to the Mike Figgis documentary that is going to come out at some point. Like, and that's what's so impressive about Megalopolis, is that they edited all of this together quicker than Mike Figgis got his documentary on Megalopolis edited together. Like, do you understand how incredible it is that you can go see this movie? You can go into a theater and see this movie right now. This is what this entire podcast exists for. Like, I do want to memorialize that it's a brick in post-Empire. This is an insanely important post-Empire contribution, but I'm recording this to say you can see this on the big... You can see this on the big screen right now, man. The moviegoers are not paying for Megalopolis tickets. They're not paying for them. I still haven't gotten to the first fucking scene of this movie. I'm gonna go get a non-alcoholic beer. I'll be right back. Penn's Best, N.A. Sign your boy to a deal. I'm cheap. I'll accept payment in cases of Penn's Best, N.A. But that would cut into my movie seeing, because the Total Wine being in the same complex as the AMC really does get me out of the house, you know. Where I'm like, all right, I need to buy 5 more 24 cases of Penn's Best, N.A. I guess it's time to go to the theaters. And so, once Megalopolis was shot, did Hollywood, as a dying medium that has only got me out of my house twice this year, and may only get me out of my house 3 times this year. Wait, no, there was. I am going to have to force my family to see that terrible Bob Dylan, Timothée Chalamet movie that's going to come out. It's either on Thanksgiving or Christmas, so I'm going to ruin one of them by forcing them to watch it, because, you know, we love Timmy. And I'm obsessed with Bob Dylan. But it's going to be, like, gross. Like, it's going to be so uncreative for one of the most creative men alive. It is going to be, like, you want to talk about a guy who plays by the rules. Holy shit. That, what the fuck's that guy's name? He did Indiana Jones and Walk the Line. Oh, man. Whatever. I mean, like, imagine you do Indiana Jones and you play everything straight by the book and you still flop. So, like, all right. And it brings me back to my main point. Did Hollywood, a dying medium, celebrate this amazing act of ambition? This pull yourself up by your own bootstraps because the industry is holding your boots down. Did they celebrate it? Did they say, wow, we're getting one of the passion projects of one of the biggest directors in the medium, and we didn't have to pay anything towards it. This is just a gift. No. The Hollywood press, being no better than Aubrey's Wow, did what they always do. People who have never created anything in their life began to campaign to snuff out the artist who did it his way. Publications from L.A., the city covered in human filth and debauchery, clutched their pearls, acting as the Vestal Virgin who's secretly a 23-year-old sex tape maker. Since the opinions of the gutter press don't matter, editing continued through the summer of 2023 for Megalopolis. When you see this movie, you'll have to wonder how it worked. Like, Mike Figgis couldn't get the documentary ready, but the movie was ready. And the movie was not just ready. There are 3 panels of movie on the movie screen. Like, you're getting movie inside a movie. This is like a stuffed crust movie. And the editing, whoever edited this, is that task. If you gave me all of the footage that appears in the final cut of Megalopolis and you asked me to edit it into Megalopolis, I would be like, check back with me in 9 years. remember when I was big in my Twilight phase? It was around when New Moon came out. And so my mom every year gets us a puzzle for Christmas, and one year she got us an Edward puzzle. And the Edward puzzle was just a picture of, like, a black background with a picture of Edward's face. But the black pieces all were totally tiny. This is like 1,000-piece puzzle. So the black pieces were totally tiny, and they were all the exact same color. And I'm not saying that megalopolis is all the same piece of the puzzle where it's interchangeable. All of these pieces are different colors, and I almost wouldn't be able to. It would be like you're assembling a puzzle and they don't give you the box to know what you're assembling. Like, editing this movie must have been impossible. And I know that this probably isn't going to be the end edit. I know that there's going to be a redux of this movie, and I'm going to watch the shit out of it. But whatever. They locked picture on this version of the movie, and then on March 28th, 2024, there was an IMAX screening held for distributors at Universal City Walk IMAX Theater in Hollywood. And this is a film that is almost impossible to gather up on first watch. It's almost why I didn't record this podcast at all. Like, if I wasn't trying to drive engagement to the theaters, I would have waited for this to stream, like how I'm going to do with Joker 2. But I can't wait, because you need to see this in theaters. The first time you see it in theaters, like, I'm still discovering this movie as I'm sitting here in the parking lot writing this. And now I'm still discovering this movie as I'm sitting on my bedroom floor recording this. It's a movie that continues to unfold. And when you're watching like 3 panels of film, or when you're watching sketches come alive, you're missing so much because your eyes are dancing around and you're putting it all together and you're trying to get your cohesive thought of the plot. And so to show this to distributors once and then be like, bet the bank on me, is so difficult. And honestly, I'm not going to like Google how it all shook out. I think Lionsgate ended up being the distributor. All I care about is the fact that it showed up at the AMC behind the Total Wine, where like that's my requirements for film distribution. You need to play on one screen, the AMC behind Total Wine in West Orange, New Jersey. And that's what Lionsgate got this film to do. And so it was a huge success. And all right, so the first festival screening happened in May of this year. Final run time of the film clocked in at 138 minutes, which is short considering this is a magnum opus. And it was shown at the 77th Annual Cannes Film Festival. Ultimately, Sean Baker's Anora won the palm, which is good because Sean Baker's a good filmmaker who makes cool movies, and I like him. I'm not going to say anything bad about him. He does his thing. I really like that Simon Rex movie. I thought it was, it was very in the style of media that I like to put into the world. And the reception was good in that it was buzzy for Megalopolis. And you want buzz. Like, you don't need universal acclaim. Like, I've seen what critics universally acclaim, and like that's almost a mark against your movie. Like that means you got on your knees in some way. If film critics are universal about your movie, like, oh, that's gotta hurt. Universal praise from film critics, you'd be like, oh, well, I guess I made a pile of shit. If all film critics liked it, I did not achieve anything. And after the festival, you had the public rollout. And the public rollout, as far as I saw it, was a teaser trailer that, in my opinion, all right, so there was a controversy with the teaser trailer in that the basic premise was that all of Francis Ford Coppola's movies are appreciated in time, where initially they aren't loved, but as time goes on, they build an audience and people end up raving about them and they're considered a classic in retrospect. In the reviews that they went through on that, they had like Pauline Kael talking shit about The Godfather or whatever, and it was all AI slop. And anyone who's a creative knows that if you look up reviews right now for any of my novels, it will write fake reviews because there aren't enough reviews of my novel. Like, enough people haven't reviewed it, so it's just going to say, T. James Reagan's Empire Waste is a fun romp that the whole family will enjoy. Where, like, it's a bitter self-insert novel about, disappointing people and creating art through pain, Like, the AI is just going to create these reviews. My theory is that people saw the only way you can write about Megalopolis is to do a takedown. And so they said, what's one thing that everyone hates right now? AI. What if we have it AI write all these fake reviews, and then all of the hall monitor ass journalists would be like, actually, Pauline Kael never said that about Godfather. She was actually pretty nice about her review. Like, the people who most deserve to get bullied in school would love to write that article. And so I think that Lionsgate realized that, and I think that was part of the promotional thing, where now you nest that teaser that contains actual footage of the film with those AI reviews in the beginning. And now you're driving traffic to this teaser that otherwise wouldn't have gone. Because you're not going to get Hollywood to write nice reviews for, hey, this guy circumvented our entire process and still made an amazing movie. Like, that's never going to happen with the Hollywood press. So you get people to watch that trailer by tricking them. And, I mean, I didn't watch a trailer because Francis had birthed one of my favorite filmmakers and given me a Vincent Gallo movie. Like, those two things, he could have made a movie called Fuck Tommy Reagan, I think his books are terrible, and I would have still advance bought tickets to it. I would be like, I can't wait to hear what this motherfucker has to say about my work. Like, when the trailer came on during College Football Saturdays, I would look away from the TV because I didn't want anything spoiled. I wanted to go in and just raw dog Megalopolis. And so that's exactly what I did. I made good on a tweet that I sent back in June, and it read, I will be taking a girl on the worst date of her life on September 27th, 2024. And sure enough, that date arrived, and it was finally time to see Megalopolis. And so, in a theater that might have only been a quarter full, and after the terrible trailers and commercials that I mentioned, and also including a trailer for some pathetic Cillian Murphy movie that, of course, is how terrible the Catholic Church is. Like, imagine Variety writing about that. Like, they will be sitting in the theaters jerking off to that movie because, their bald skulls will just tingle when they see it. But anyways, after that terrible trailer, Megalopolis finally began. And here we are. We're probably like, oh my gosh, I'm not even going to look at the runtime, but we're probably like an hour and a half into this podcast. And just now, we're getting to the opening scene of Megalopolis. They're going to use this podcast series as like evidence to institutionalize me. In my effort to not become F. Scott Fitzgerald, I will become Zelda Fitzgerald. Oh, man. My Susanna Kaysen arc is coming very soon. But until then, let's summarize Megalopolis. Lawrence Fishburne, who is our narrator, reads from a gilded plaque that says, I had to keep so much other shit in my head that I forget what the gilded plaque says at the beginning of this movie. Like, this is probably why I should have waited until it went out on streaming. But here we are. We're here. There's a gilded plaque. It says something about, like, humanity's hope and dreams. And after we look at this plaque, we are placed in a near future alternate history. And what will occur in this near future alternate history is a fable. It's not supposed to be taken as the real world. It's supposed to speak of the real world. Megalopolis never tries to ground us in reality, and it's immediately shown in the opening scene. I think they probably use this as a teaser, where Adam Driver opens up the window at the tippy top of a building and very carefully but skittishly walks out to the edge of this building, balances on the edge, and then declares, "Time, stop." And all of the cars cease to drive. All of the city is frozen. And Caesar trembles in this moment, in his power. His reaction tells you that maybe he doesn't even trust his power, that he won't fall to his death. But he gathers himself up, and he allows time to resume. And the cars continue down the road, horns blaring, and the city comes alive again. And so when he flicks time back on, this isn't just Caesar putting things in motion. This is Adam Driver putting things in motion in the way he's been doing for so many directors. He's taken projects that were stopped for decades. You know, Scorsese's Silence, Man of La Mancha, Don Quixote. He starred in that when the Johnny Depp production went totally sideways for Terry Gilliam. He starred in Michael Mann's Ferrari. These auteurs had passions that stretched 30, 40, 50 years. And Adam Driver was able to unstop time. He used his stardom to make sure everything went into motion and stayed in motion as long as he wanted it to. And that's like being an actor is a job. But then you also have to look at the legacy that you're leaving behind. Anyone looking at Robert Downey Jr.'s legacy would be like, this is a guy who wasted his talent. He's the linchpin for the biggest franchise in the history of the world, and he'll be remembered for that. But if you're an actor, is that what you want to be remembered for? Like his Jamie Lee Curtis Constellation Prize Please Go Away Oscar last year, no one is going to think about that performance. No one's going to be like, I saw Robert Downey Jr. in the Bomb movie and I gotta say, it got me interested in acting. No one's going to say that. But when Adam Driver, all things said and done, the critics aren't going to say like, oh, he was essential for blah, blah, blah. Like he did his Downey time in Star Wars, but then he was an artist about what he chose to do. He made people's dreams happen. And this is why he's our Caesar. And so we follow this guy and we trust in this guy. And I gotta tell you, I needed Adam Driver as Caesar in this first scene because I was like almost scared in this first scene because not the time stop scene, but the next scene. We're in like these suspended platforms and there's so much commotion everywhere. There's like crowds of people around and they're all waiting to hear what Caesar has to say and then what the mayor has to say. And, it's like a intellectual meeting of the minds, but it's also treated like a paparazzi thing. And while Platinum is there and it's so chaotic, like the sound of cameras, the shutters of cameras is constantly flicking as this dialogue that's like almost like Shakespeare meets DeLillo is happening, like, it doesn't ease you into this film at all. You are thrown into a world of chaos, and they're trying to find solutions for this chaos. But if you're a moviegoer, I can see you like almost begin to go cross-eyed and check out. But with me having Driver as my, like, I could follow Driver. I will let Driver take those risks, and I'll follow him with those risks. And so while that shutter noise was going, Adam Driver's Caesar declares his vision for the future. And then our antagonist, Cicero, declares that these future pipe dreams aren't needed right now. What's needed right now is immediate help for his people. And the difference between Caesar and Cicero is that Cicero has to worry about the next election. Cicero's time frame is so much shorter than Caesar's. Because as we'll learn with Caesar, he's not in great standing with the public. He got the Nobel Prize for inventing megalon, this new material that he wants to build with. And Cicero became mayor because he's going to build the brick and mortar buildings of the past, because there's an affordable housing crisis. And so he needs that short-term solution. In Caesar's short-term, he is, on the outs with the culture. And so he's going to build a new world to accept him. But it's going to take a long time. And what Cicero's basically saying is that, like, you can tell people that the turkey is going to be delicious, but if they're eating dirt right now, they don't care. Give me a bad tasting turkey over a delicious turkey that's going to show up in 2 decades. And so there's like this franticness to the scene, but it's also one of those things where if people watch this at home, you gotta lock in on this scene. You can't be checking your phone. It's a demand for attention that I don't think is required in theaters, but I do think is required at home. You can't fold laundry during this scene, or you're going to be lost without a rudder for the entire time. And I was just taking it all in. I was taking everything in, and this is the first scene where you see Natalie Emmanuel, and she's just so fucking pretty, man. She has the face of what fat girls think Meghan Markle looks like. That's what Natalie Emmanuel looks like. She's so fucking pretty. And, I immediately noticed her, and I noticed that she clearly had suspicions about Caesar, but she was also drawn to him. I think this might be the first scene where we see that she has this little, like, glowing ring, and she's taking voice memos in her ring. And she seems focused on Caesar. And maybe that's just one of those things where, like, forbidden love is so like, if you look at the Pornhub front page, it'll show you exactly where forbidden love is in our culture right now. Like, it's is there a word for a taboo that is, like, so popular? Where it's like, we can't speak of this, but we can't shut the fuck up about it either. Like, that's what the forbidden love is like here. And she's got a lot going on because she is, in some ways, like a failure. Like, her father is the mayor, and she had 1 year of medical school, and now she's a socialite. And so I think she's sort of interrogating her father's, like, when you're a kid, your parents are infallible, and then when you get older, you, like, understand how they made decisions, and you understand no one's infallible except God. And then if you had parents that were making decisions that, like the general public were saying were unacceptable, then you would start to interrogate your parents' decision making. And I think that's what Natalie Emmanuel's Julia is doing in this opening scene. Like, Sometimes your best shot at figuring the world out is to remain open to everyone's perspective and then pick and choose the lessons that you learn along the way. Like, knowing someone's character will tell you so much about the actions they take. And so if you keep documenting their character, if you keep talking into your little voice note ring, you will eventually have field notes. Like I took all these notes and I'm turning them into a podcast, and I'm extrapolating, what do I think of Caesar? What do I think of Cicero? What do I think of Julia? What do I think of Claudio? And all of this is because I picked up different nuances from different scenes, and then now I'm able to relay who I think has good intentions, who I think has bad intentions, whose intentions are murky, who's to be trusted, and who is a deceiving snake. And in a less constructive way, our Julia is taking those voice notes, and then we have Wow Platinum on another raised platform, and she is giving the news broadcast, and she is sensationalizing everything, and she is giving everything a boost. And her name alone is telling the viewer, don't take this so seriously. But her name is also saying, you're not going to be able to stop watching her. And that's exactly what happens. We see her interviewing Crassus, and we see her reporting on Caesar, and we understand that she understands so much about this family, and she can use that to her advantage. It's not just for her job. She can use that in her personal life as well. She reports on this stuff almost like it's a red carpet. And of course, every reviewer that you're going to read is going to be like, she's like a Fox News reporter. But it's only because they're so ideologically possessed that they're offhand for untrustworthy reporters is the same soullessness of an MSNBC reporter. It's whatever your other team is, they'll be like, Wow Platinum is just like a Fox News reporter, where it's if you've ever watched Fox News, no. She's like Nick Lachey. Remember when they used to, that little patch of grass in the Grove where they used to have that, I forget what it was, Access Hollywood or something like that? She's like an Access Hollywood reporter. And in this news reporting, I do see a bit of a debt to Baz Luhrmann in some of Megalopolis, where his Romeo and Juliet, where they go through the news report of Juliet. I think Wow Platinum setting up Caesar, saying he created megalon, which is a gold and mercury substance that hardens into building materials, and he won the Nobel Prize, and we'll be seeing what other resources that megalon can do. It can turn into clothes, or it could be used for surgery, or a lot of exposition as a news report is what they use Wow Platinum for in the beginning there. It's really great how Wow gives all this exposition as the onlooker, and then I think it was probably immediately the next scene, Coppola takes us to Wow, and she's in bed in a messy room watching TV, and Caesar walks in. And immediately I was like, no, I get it, Caesar. There's nothing like a platinum blonde BPD girlfriend to destabilize your life just enough that your creative juices are totally flowing. That's basically my entire process. And I'm not even picky about the hair color. People will be like, but Tommy, you wrote a book called Hot Blonde Girls with Heavy Eye Makeup. And, that's my ideal. Give me your raven-haired, ginger-haired, nappy-haired, Rapunzel-haired. I'll even take short-haired women. If they're like Kristen Stewart when she played Gene Seberg, as long as they don't have Gene Seberg's politics. I will take any bipolar girlfriend because they are great for creativity. However, unlike most BPD girlfriends, Wow actually knows what she wants. Adam Driver, Caesar, shows up to this room, and Wow states clearly that she wants to be more than a mistress. And you'll say, more than a mistress? Well, who's she a mistress to? Who is Caesar's significant other? And that is a huge plot point, which we will get to. But for now, Wow Platinum is straddling Caesar and begging him for more, but Caesar's too concerned about what's going on outside. This room, we see the bed, and then there's window walls of the city. And most men are focused on what's in that bed. Like, Aubrey Plaza's butt looks so good in this movie. Like, the most yummy keister of hers and Margaret Qualley's in The Substance. And I know you're probably like, how have you not reviewed The Substance yet? Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Anyways, you know what? Let's talk about who Wow would be a mistress for. I don't have much knowledge about mistresses because, it's not like I can get one girl, much less two girls. So, in this case, I come to understand that Wow is referring to Caesar's deceased wife. Caesar had a wife. He no longer has a wife. But if you were to ask Caesar in that moment if he has a wife, he would probably say he has a wife. And if you ask the general public, they would probably say Caesar killed his wife. And the reason why they would say that is because Cicero planted such a story for political persecution. Isn't it amazing that Coppola shot this in Atlanta, Georgia, and political persecution is one of the primary plot drivers? It's just, when you know, you know. And at the time of her death, Caesar's wife had a secret. And the secret was that she was pregnant. She was pregnant when she died, and she died by driving off of a bridge, splashing into the water, and then it seems like her body was ejected from the vehicle. So she's there, floating, and we know she wasn't saved. We know she's dead. We see her on a gurney what's that thing called? When they pull you out of the freezer and you're on that tray? There's got to be a name for it. I listen to way too much metalcore to not know the name of the freezer tray body thing that they have at the morgue. There must be 10 bands that are named whatever that thing is named. But you get it. The point is, she's dead. We see her dead. She looks pretty good naked on that thing. And now, maybe because of that accident, Caesar as a driver, maybe he's so traumatized by that auto accident, he no longer sits in the front seat of the car. So in the front seat of the car, we have Lawrence Fishburne's Fundy Romaine. And that's also our narrator. He also read that plaque to us. And now he's a character. And, they're driving through a crumbling city. And he proposes, if you like ruins, we could go to Atlantic City, where New Jersey mentioned, that's what's up. Thank you, Francis. We appreciate the acknowledgement. And then after that, they discuss time, and they discuss it like a George Carlin bit where he's like, you can spend time, but you can't make time. You can create time, but you can't give time. When it's too much, you call a time out, but you can't put time in. One of those things where it's like a time wordplay. I don't know. Carlin did that a lot. And any artist is obsessed with time. If you listen to Martin Scorsese right now, all he talks about is time. Where he's like, God willing, I'll be able to make my Jesus movie. God willing, I'll be able to make a movie that would have been better if I didn't cast Leonardo DiCaprio. And even on my side, I'm still, I guess, quote unquote young, but I've been working so much overtime at my salaried job recently. And those extra hours, I can go through the entire day, but then the extra hours I'm working hurt my soul like desk hours never did. I guess it's just hours of my life are being vampirically sucked away. And and I'm not going to say anything more about this, because the whole reason why I was able to see Megalopolis is because they pay my salary. Like, I just bought every single season of, wait for it, Riverdale. So, like, imagine you're my job and you hear me bitching about that. They're like, oh, I'm sorry, Tommy. I didn't mean to take away from your time of watching the Heathers musical Riverdale episode the third straight night. Oh, I really apologize. We didn't want to take time out of letting you watch the Giants once again disappoint you every single Sunday. Yeah, you really couldn't have clocked in for that time when they went scoreless for an entire quarter. I mean, fuck, I need the distraction now more than ever. Daniel Jones was not the solution. We could not build Megalopolis with Daniel Jones under center. And so anyways, as they slice through life, the city, and it's all decaying, time seems to almost be moving faster. The decay seems to be increasing as they move through the city. When the car finally stops, Caesar gets out, and all of the green gloom of the city can't infiltrate this one piece of the city, and it's a flower stand. This flower stand glows with the golden hue that so much of this film glows with. And so Caesar goes and he buys flowers, and then with the flowers in hand, he walks into a nondescript building, and there, on the second floor, in a glowing bed, attended to by two women, is Caesar's wife, Sunny Hope. And Caesar waves the women away who are attending to his wife, and they leave the room, and it's just Caesar and his wife. Except our narrator and our chauffeur was distracting Caesar, so he didn't realize that he was being followed. And when he went up to see his wife, he didn't realize he was being followed. And who he was being followed by is Julia. And she stands in that door frame, and she realizes that Caesar is still in love with his wife, as Caesar sits and he braids the flowers into his wife's hair. And seeing that Caesar never gave up on his wife, Julia begins to reconsider so many things that her father told her about Caesar, that her father told the entire city of New Rome about Caesar. And this new curiosity allows her to pursue other truths that the media might be posturing up, or scared men might be trying to impose their will, because Caesar has a power that no one else does. And they're trying to level this playing field. So they're doing it with lies, and they're doing it with deceit, and they're doing it with character assassination. And Julia probably thinks to herself that we might not be very far off from real assassination. And so she continues to follow him. And she follows him as he begins his plans for how he's going to change New Rome. And one of those plans is, with this decaying city, he needs to clear space. You need to clear out the garden and till the soil before something new can grow. And so Caesar arrives, and he's standing in front of the type of shitty apartment building that I live in, and he gives the all clear for a demolition to begin. And the charges blast, and the building begins to collapse, and Caesar does his time stop bit once again. And from a car, observing this, is Julia. All the workers are frozen. All the people going about their lives in the city are frozen. The demolished building hangs still intact in portions. And Caesar is moving, and Julia is observing this all, free to move. She is not frozen. She is not stopped by Caesar's superpower. And now nothing makes sense to her. And she needs to figure out why. She's not a dumb girl. She's not a moronic socialite. You have Claudio's sister. She is a moron. There's no bones about it. Julia is not a moron. Julia is someone who hasn't reached her potential yet. And now she's looking at Caesar as someone who continues to think that they haven't reached their potential yet. And this excites her. And maybe there's an idea that they can both reach their potential together. This man has altered her understanding of the world, and she has no way to ask questions because she's Cicero's daughter. So she dons a disguise, and Caesar is sitting in his Art Deco office, and he's discussing his plans, and suddenly Julia arrives, and she takes off her disguise, and she's a beautiful woman, and so she thinks this is going to go one way. But Caesar isn't concerned. We see him with WoW Platinum. And like I said, her butt looks phenomenal. Just a all-time keister. And he didn't care. He was more concerned about his vision than he was about WoW on her knees. And so when this pretty girl shows up at his office, he doesn't see a pretty girl in as much as he sees the daughter of someone who worked against his vision. And so he belittles her, calls her a socialite who was only able to hack 1 year of medical school. And she's showing up to demand his knowledge. And at this point, Adam Driver does a line reading that is so bonkers. I think it's going to become a meme where he declares, "So go back to the club." I can't even, this line reading, I can't even recreate. "So go back to the club." I can't do it. It is like, it is one of those things where having a loose set, it's a 1 in a million thing you can do. And I was sitting there and I was like, what the fuck? In the best way. You just gotta see it. I mean, this moment had me, I was looking up at the screen like the Nicole Kidman intro that the West Orange AMC plays before every single movie. I was like, this is why we go to the cinema instead of going back to the club. And then as a callback to the, wordplay in the car, Caesar goes, "Come back when you have more time." And this pauses Julia. That time stop that she witnessed is like just too much, and she can't even play her hand on it. But she had it in her head where it's like she has that undeniable image of Caesar Catalina, chairman of the design authority, taking down buildings to build a utopia, and he froze it all for a couple brief moments. Why? Just to prove that he can? And so Julia pauses the implosion. She turns back to Caesar, and she reveals that she saw what he can do. She reveals that she saw he could stop time. And she questions, does Caesar Catalina not even heed the laws of physics? Something to that effect. And now she has Caesar's attention. She uses some word like string theory or something. I don't know. I'm a dumb guy. But it's enough that he turns on a dime. And now he's intrigued. Because no one else can experience Caesar's time stop. And now she's back. And now she has time. Because as a guy who makes stuff, when you're in a relationship, it's like someone sent me a tweet recently, and they were like, "This is the type of shit you say to me that makes me sick." And it was, the Black Little Mermaid, she broke up with her boyfriend, and he wrote, no one tells you that a relationship is like a part-time job or something like that. And that's how it is for a creative person, is that relationship is like you're taking on a part-time job as well, because your time is being taken away. But Caesar realizes in this moment, if he can stop time and Julia still moves during that stop time, Julia won't take his time. He can stop time and they can exist together in this stopped time, and he won't lose his productivity. And so the number one thing that keeps a creative man out of relationship is nullified by this superpower, not only that Caesar has, but that Julia possesses as well. And this completely changes how Caesar regards his guest. They go through the Art Deco office and they arrive at what is a not quite small model of megalopolis. And I think he blindfolds her and puts her at the edge of the model. And he says, walk through megalopolis and tell me what you see. And she does that. She walks without sight through megalopolis, and she tells him of the city, of the people collaborating with each other, of the great buildings, everything. Her eyes become Caesar's eyes. And it's like in Fritz Lang's Metropolis that Francis is referencing throughout this movie. We see that Julia is the heart of the city. What once was a nuisance is now a essential collaborator. Now these are two people walking through an imagined city together. They both see things differently, but through those differences, a better city will be built. Utopia isn't one person's perfect vision of the world, but a collective's view of the world. There's one point in Megalopolis, I forget where this comes up, but Caesar's talking to a design guy, and he says, like, what if the power was stored in the same place it was distributed, or something like that? And it's like, that's the Fritz Lang heart of it all, is that the heart is a universal sign for love. And the heart is also pumping the blood throughout the entire city of a body. And so the question of what can be is something that thrills Julia, where her father does not look at what can be. He looks at what needs to be right now. And there's this beautiful motif where Caesar and Julia go up to the top of his tower, and on the top of the tower, almost like a helicopter pad, is a giant clock. And this giant clock has hands that move freely, and they step over the hands, and they look out at what the city is, and they imagine what the city will be. They're stepping over the hands of time as they share these different viewpoints. And each time they return to this place, their connection grows deeper. But, they are not the only ones who have visions for New Rome. It's not just Caesar. It's not just Mayor Cicero. We also have our boy, Shia LaBeouf. Hell yeah, dog. I mean, for Shia heads, this is another great role. And Shia knows exactly what movie he's in more than almost anyone except Aubrey. Aubrey has tapped into the exact intention that Coppola had from a screenwriting standpoint. If I was to look at these words, Aubrey would be embodying the tone of that script. Arguably tied is Shia. And Shia plays Claudio Pulcher. And he's based on a person who actually existed. Like, I also know that Caesar existed. I'm not like, you ever have a pizza before? That little guy, turns out he's a real person. So, Publius Claudius Pulcher, ugly name. Like, this is the second straight podcast where we have ugly names. Like, the last podcast was my Tortured Poets podcast, where we had a song about Charlie Puth. Disgusting. Like, the microphone can't even pick up his name. Like, Charlie Puth is a singer, and like the microphone can't pick up his name without sounding like blown out and disgusting. Like, he's that gross. And Publius Claudio Pulcher is the Charlie Puth of New Rome. But he was also a populist politician from the Roman Empire during the Triumvirate, and he would dress like a Greek goddess. And so when you see Shia dressed up in the Greek goddess outfits, that is based on this real guy, where the real guy would dress up like this goddess and he would sneak into the rites of the goddess Bondia. And that was like a woman-only affair that for a man to access, he would have to pretend he was a woman. So much like the men who are currently pretending they're women and getting access to female spaces, you know, Publius Claudio Pulcher was the OG. He was on the bottom floor of that shit. He was the first one to figure it out. He'd probably be so happy with how society is going right now, where he'd be like, see, I told you. You guys just didn't understand the vision. My megalopolis is happening. And they just call it Portland. Anyways. Just as the real Claudius was descended from one of Rome's oldest and noblest families, so too is Shia's Claudio, where Shia's Claudio has beef with Cicero, where just like the IRL version of Claudio had beef with a dude named Cicero too. And the way that Shia and Caesar connect is that their uncle is John Voight, Hamilton Crassus III, and he's the head of the Crassus National Bank. And this is another post-Empire casting as well, because we all know that John Voight isn't allowed to be in real movies anymore because he's a Trump guy. And because of that, obviously, Hollywood can't support him at all. And he also has a daughter who happens to be the foremost expert in parental alienation. So, you know, it is extremely post-Empire that the patriarch of this entire film is a guy that people with daddy issues despise. Like, amazing casting by Francis Ford Coppola. But I was worried. Like, as much as I like these refusals to give in to casting, I was like, the last time I saw John Voight was Ray Donovan, and he seems to have deteriorated so much in this version of Hamilton Crassus III, how he appears in Megalopolis. And I was like, I think this motherfucker might have had a stroke, and he just, you know, showed up on set and Coppola just went with it. But turns out he's just a really good actor because this whole thing played in my mind only for a plot point to arise that he has a stroke. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. We are talking about Shia. I just wanted to sort of like get the post-Empire casting out of the way that, you know, nephew and uncle are both these castings that any other production that they would have HR'd out immediately. But Francis said, my money. I casted Shia back when he was on better terms than he is now. I'm not going to give up on the dude. And it pays off. That's the best thing. Where Shia creates this Claudio, where Claudio feels he should be the one who leads, but he doesn't have the temperament for it. Just like Shia, he was going to be the next Tom Hanks, but he doesn't have the Tom Hanks temperament. And just like Shia, you know, if you listen to my post-Empire Shia podcast, you'll hear me go through after the Daniel Klaus thing. Shia went out into the streets, and this is what Claudio does too. Claudio goes out into the streets and he riles things up. You know, Shia had the he will not divide us. And that was like riling up the streets. And Claudio is riling up the streets in New Rome as well, because he sees, you know, the potential for someone who is so not like his beliefs, who's currently in power. And he sees that there are other people just like him. And the way to that power is to rile those people up. So Claudio is about destabilization without a plan. Caesar is about destabilization with a long-term plan. And then Cicero is about keeping the status quo and trying to immediately attend to the needs of his constituency. Caesar is saying we should not manufacture any more gasoline cars. We should only manufacture electric cars. And Cicero is saying, okay, but we need these gas vehicles right now, and we don't have the infrastructure for every single person to be waiting at a charging station. And then what Claudio is saying is, let's blow that car up. It would look awesome on fire. And this is something that's gone throughout history. Like Orson Welles' Magnificent Ambersons deals with this point. But the difference is, in Megalopolis, the movie, we have this substance, megalon. And it's one of those things where, we didn't have mRNA vaccines. And then once mRNA vaccines came on, we are able to address things in ways that would have been unthinkable before we had these vaccines. And so megalon is a game changer arrival, and it's the way forward. It's like a stable material, but also unstable in that it has like a liquidy malleability, and it seems to continue to evolve as Caesar evolves. It almost builds on itself. And each time there are new demands, megalon seems to have the ability to adapt to address those demands. And so now we have these three different views. We have Claudio Chaos, we have future Caesar, and we have in the now Cicero. And all three of these people come together. And they come together for Hamilton Crassus's wedding to, wait for it. Who do you think he gets married to? None other than our siren. Wow, Platinum. We arrive at the wedding at Madison Square Garden, which is also a Roman Colosseum. And we show up there, and there's a starlet in a megalon dress. And this dress is almost like a series of tiny cameras. And so the cameras on the back project out to the front, so the dress looks invisible. And wearing the dress is Grace Vanderwall, who is our Vestal Virgin. And she is the grand finale of this wedding, because a lot of stuff is going to happen at the Madison Square Garden Coliseum. You know that SNL bit that Bill Hader did where it's like, this club has everything. It's the this club has everything of a night at Madison Square Garden. And of course, because this is a city in decline, entertainment is all they have. So this is a sold out night. It's the entire garden is packed. And there's like the decadence of old Rome, but then there's the commoners in the audience, and there's this distraction idea that's going in there. But then there's also these rich people who will be doing, bidding to raise money, and tempers are high, but they're burning off their animosity with gladiators and chariots. And this set piece has some of the most fantastic and inventive camera work of the entire film, where there's like adrenaline moments where Coppola has mounted cameras to chariots as they circle the stadium, and like the speed and the raw horsepower that's created is such an adrenalized moment that it's like incredible. Like the horses rushing forward are, cinematically, you watch that on a big screen and you're like in the chariot. And then there are also Dutch angles. Caesar shows up at the wedding table of Crassus, and he sees his ex-wife Platinum, and he sees his devouring mother, and he sees his idiot cousin Claudio, and you feel Caesar destabilized. And wait, stop the presses. Also in this set piece, we have it's probably the first on-screen appearance for her. I don't know, there's that show, I think it's called Education that Romy's in. So I don't know if that's her first appearance, but Perfect Princess Romy Mars plays like an interviewer in this movie. And since the only ad that I have in this pod is me begging you to buy my books, I would also like to do an unpaid ad for Romy Mars. She has a 2-song EP called Stuck Up, and I compulsively listen to it. Like back when I was heavily drinking, I used to put on, she has this song called From a Distance. I know it's been a while, but don't say that I'm too late. Call off your date, say you can't stay, come home to broken dinner plates, and I know we're not the same, but opposites attract, we're so mismatched, we're so attached, you're everything I never had. Oh my gosh, it's so good. It's like, just listen to it. It's the godfather of the songs for yearners. Like, it is Romy Ford Coppola Mars creating her megalopolis that is the song From a Distance. It's incredible. Okay, Perfect Princess Romy Mars ad break complete. Now we go back, and the camera is just super unstable right now. We're at like Dutch angles at the table, and while Platinum is there with Caesar's uncle, Crassius, and the drunkenness of Crassius is what I was like, man, I think John Voight had a stroke and just no one cared enough, because you know how people are like, Trump's very deserved it. Like, I just figured that would be the only news report that would get circulated about, where they're like, Karma is my boyfriend, he got what he deserved, you know. Like, that's the only way it would be reported on, and since I've blocked all those people on Twitter, I would just never see it. But he was acting, he was playing wasted, which is hard to do, and he was so convincing that something was seriously wrong with him that I genuinely thought something was seriously wrong with him. So once again, John Voight, your Oscar's in the mail. And so we're at Caesar's spin out, and like, this spin out literally has spins in it. It's like, you know how Robert Rodriguez went and got Quentin Tarantino to direct a portion of Sin City? This was like if Coppola went and got Trainspotting era Danny Boyle to just be like, do whatever you want for this part of the scene, because the camera work and the cinematography are so manic and creative, and they're like, you know, we have Caesar who's sitting in a chair, and he drops a glass, and the glass hits the wall to the left, and there's like a lighter in suspension to his right, and the laws of physics don't apply, and it's all these trick shots, and he's growing arms or stuff like that, like Shiva, I think, at one point. You know, I can't accurately summarize what this scene is like, because it's coming at you so impossibly quickly that by the time my brain tried to figure out one of the shots, I was like 2 shots behind where Coppola was putting this together. And all of this is to show us the instability in his life, because, you know, Coppola always says movies are an illusion. And so there are always, you know, like a scene where the overbearing girlfriend, where even now you can have a biopic and like the entire point of the female love interest is to like walk into a room and be like, I don't even recognize you anymore, you need to stop drinking, blah blah, and it's all like exposition-y to say like, oh, our guy is totally spinning out because this overbearing mother figure has shown up and said that he's unacceptable. With Coppola, all of Caesar's spin out is visual, and that's what I love about it, because Julia, when she comes to save him, she does it with the invisible tether, where they're having a tug of war in a corridor, and you can hear the tension of the rope, but the rope is invisible, because when you're in a relationship and when one of those people is spinning out, they're trying to pull you to safety or pull you back from the edge, but it's an invisible rope, and so there's a pull on both sides there. And he even illustrates it where he has trapeze artists up on stage at Madison Square Garden while this is happening. And they say, now is the portion where we will be performing without a net. And they, do their trapeze thing. And at one point they miss a handoff and you think that this woman is about to fall to her death, but there's a rope that she grabs onto and she slides down the rope, and then the audience applauds this masterwork of trickery. And that's exactly what Coppola is doing. So he's showing you what he's doing as he's doing it, and it's just, you even see Caesar where she's pulling me back from where I need to be, and you see Julia where she's saying, no, I am that safety rope. I am the rope that you can hold on to when you have no net. And that's why it's so powerful to see those scenes. I'm going to in detail discuss my favorite scene of them where they're suspended high up, they have no net. And so there's also foreshadowing going on in this scene. There's this set piece is, I don't see things like this in movies anymore. And I can't wait until it streams, because I'm going to be watching this scene over and over and over again. And it's powerful that when Julia comes to Caesar and he's in mid spin out, she's still her father's daughter. And imagine if she just held up her phone and filmed all of this. Imagine what her father could do with that footage of a total spin out. And you don't have to imagine that type of footage ruining Caesar, because Coppola shows you that Caesar could be destroyed by footage. Because what happens is, behind the scenes you see Claudio, and he's got this USB drive, and he goes up to the command center where the director is directing all the digital boards and everything like that, and he puts that USB drive into a computer there, and then he goes back down and he sits in the audience. And on stage, what we have performing, remember when I was telling you about our Vestal Virgin? Well, she is actually named Vesta, and there's a Roman parallel for this, because the Vestal Virgins were used in Rome. And just to set up Vesta initially, we see her, she's wearing a dress made of megalon, and then now she's suspended up high, and she's sitting on I think a crescent moon, and they're slowly lowering her down as she's playing the ukulele maybe. And visually this is really stunning, but first let's discuss the Vestal Virgin thing. So Vestals in ancient Rome were priestesses, and they were originally chosen before puberty, and they'd be emancipated from their family, and they would be enrolled in Vesta's priestly college, where there's 6 priestesses. And a senior Vestal would watch over them, and they'd remain virginal, or I think if they didn't remain virginal, they would be buried alive. So, there was a big incentive where if you did not want to be buried alive, you'd be like, is this dick good enough to be buried alive? No, probably not. So it was, a pretty good incentive. And the reason why Vesta's visually it's so interesting is because, so by her nature, Vesta, the Vestal Virgin, she is supposed to remain pure for the empire. And visually, what Coppola does is he has her replicate. So, what's the one thing Vesta can't do? She can't make another version of herself. And so the performance, the stunning beauty is that Coppola makes copies and copies and copies of her as she's performing, and you realize what the sacrifice is, because you want every girl to be Vesta, And so it makes her purity that much more strong of a sacrifice for the empire. And if you wanted to be sassy, I'm sure all the reviewers are, they'll be like, oh, and then he just films a music video in the middle of this, where the whole time I was watching this, I was like, get Caroline Polachek in a room with Francis Ford Coppola and make a music video, because that match would be incredible. And so it's not even a critique. Like, I haven't watched a music video since, I don't know, like whatever the last 1975 music video was, part of the band. And so it's an art form that means nothing to me. And so when I'm sitting in a theater and I watch a visually stunning music video, I don't even remember the song, because visually it was so rich that it was incredible. And so, like we were saying, where Julia could have filmed Caesar, she could have given the spin out footage to her father, and it could be extremely advantageous. And we know this to be the case because as Vesta's performance is crescendoing, on the screens, we see what Claudio had on that USB drive. And what it is Caesar laying in bed, and on top of him is our Vestal Virgin. And so this is being projected out to the entire Colosseum, and people start freaking out, because right before this, they were literally bidding, hundreds of millions of dollars for her to remain pure. And they realize all that charity money has gone to an invalid charity. And you think like, oh, well, this is going to decimate Caesar. And the interesting thing is Coppola knows our current culture so well. So it's almost immediately reported that this happens, and they say this is a underage Vestal Virgin, and Caesar was caught in bed with her. And then it gradually says, but we realized it was a deep fake. And because it was a deep fake, we looked into it further, and we found out Vesta, the Vestal Virgin, is not underage. She's actually 23. And now that everyone knows that she's 23, she's become XXX Tina, And it's a perfect commentary on our culture, because this is how it got community noted. You know how like once Elon took over Twitter, where all of the things where like Rachel Maddow can just tweet out a lie and then everyone will be like, well, that's just the truth now. And now you can like community note that thing. So this got community noted immediately, and it immediately undercut everything that Claudio was trying to do. And there's a real world parallel to that. It's far more than like a Gooner deepfake going public. It's that we see Caesar being attacked because of his power, but also because of his power, this rolls off his back. And it's exactly what happened with Taylor Swift, where Taylor Swift had those deep fakes that happened, where she acted outraged when it first happened, which I'm sure she was, and then she did not mention it ever again. And she like was outraged for it for as long as that purge masked face Patrick Bateman looking California guy could exploit it for trying to push a non-First Amendment deepfake law through, which obviously got vetoed because it was obviously against the First Amendment. But she was able to be the springboard for purge mask. And so once that happened, she just didn't talk about it anymore, because Taylor Swift is an extremely successful person with wildly large ambitions, and she doesn't care that, someone is sharing a obviously cartoonish fake of her, sucking a corn dog like a penis at Arrowhead. That isn't, she wasn't like falling asleep every night in tears to that, because she has real problems to deal with. That her weird Gooner deepfake fans weren't going to be like, I can't support her anymore. There's no impact to it at all. And there's no impact to Caesar's life at all for this deepfake that happens. And people are always complaining like that plot line wrapped up too easily, where it's like, yeah, plot lines get wrapped up insanely easily. Like, we just decided in a span of like 3 days that we would just not acknowledge the president, his existence anymore, and everyone was like, okay, yeah, we just pretend this guy doesn't exist anymore. In like 20 years ago, that would be a massive thing for like months, and we got over it in a weekend. And so the fact that people are saying like, oh, well, Vesta moves on so quickly and she becomes XXX Tina so fast. Like, yeah, Miley Cyrus was like on the cover of Vanity Fair, in a blanket, and then 3 weeks later she was like grinding on Alan Thicke. That's the speed of this. And you would think like an 80-year-old guy would be pontificating about this for like, have the deep fake hanging over Adam Driver's head, and they would be stating, all of the we can't trust our people, and all this concern trolling that Purge Mask did. You would think an 80-year-old man would do, but he was actually so aware that he treated it exactly how Taylor tweeted her deepfake scandal. And it was like handled so well that it's going to be a critique that in real life doesn't hold up. So like, people want to live in a fantasy world because everyone is so used to all of their content being spread out for like 6 seasons that they're like, no, he just wrapped this up in like a quick montage. Yeah, that's what's great about Megalopolis. There's so many ideas in this thing, and you can wrap so much information up in this quick little montage. That's still why the editing is so crazy to me. And so with this scandal resolved, let's talk about how Caesar's other scandal gets resolved. And this is the scandal that was brought about by Julia's father. And it's something that Caesar is legitimately haunted by. We see him in front of, shards of Megalon, and he's going through this in his mind. We see him, and he's sitting on his wife's bed, braiding her hair. This is what destroys him, not that simple deep fake. Because this haunted woman is so vivid to him. And just as a beautiful parallel. So we just had that Vestal Virgin and we saw her multiply. So there is a footage, I don't recall when it happens in the film, but it's a direct parallel to how that Vestal Virgin multiplies, where we have Sunny Hope, his pregnant wife, and her body is submerged underwater, and we see her, and the body breaks apart, and when it breaks apart, we see that it's people body painted to form the image. I forget if it's his wife or if it's the fetus, but it's this beautiful moment where it's like Caesar didn't lose a wife, he lost a family. There are multiple people that he is dealing with the loss of, and it's weighing on him. And Julia knows that her father was responsible for all of this, so she goes to her father's house, and all of his research that he did is there. And she starts going through it. She starts going through news clippings. She starts reading her father's insights. And what she finds is that her father was not truthful in his persecution. And she knows that there's a way that she can undo this. Because just like that image of one person breaking into multiple people, Julia is a young woman and she's fallen for Caesar, and she realizes not that she could replace Sunny Hope, but that she could give that Sunny Hope wasn't Caesar's last chance to have that paradise of a family. And this is the gift that Julia is able to share with Caesar. It's the miracle of the woman to create in the way that a man can never. We can help conceive life, but we can't birth it. And so the ultimate creator cannot create this one thing without Julia. And she understands that as their collaboration gets deeper, this is something that she can create for him. And so, lying in their bed in a beautiful white dress, Julia tells Caesar that she's pregnant. And there's none of the concern that he had with the idea that he was losing time. There's no like, oh, now I have to be changing diapers when I could be changing the world. There's none of that. It's only joy. And she understood this. That's this gift that she is giving to him, where he is getting something that life just cruelly took away. There wasn't a grand narrative. He didn't cause that crash. He didn't cause that death. And he has no way of using Megalon to return what is now gone. But he can still continue to create, and he can still have a future where he can have that family. And Julia has provided that to him. And she's always been one of those people that, has been that tether. And from that restraint, you don't see the spun out guy anymore. Now you see a guy who's more filled with life. And that weight on his shoulders, you can see it lifting. And he wants to share this joy. And so in the attempt to share the joy, Caesar and Julia, they invite Cicero into their home along with his wife. And their home is like this beautiful, it almost resembles like a flower, where if you were to like sit inside a flower. And they sit at a table and they play a game. And, this game could be seen as like two men sitting at a table facing each other on the opposite sides, trying to defeat each other, just as they always have before. But the way Caesar and Julia approach this game, it's more like saying, our competitions can be friendly. We can sit down and we can play this game, and it doesn't have to be for keeps, where we can look each other in the eyes and we can laugh and joke, and maybe you beat me or maybe I beat you, but the winner doesn't have to destroy the other. The game can be played and won and lost, and you can proceed without animosity towards each other. But unfortunately, when Julia does make that announcement, she does tell her parents that she's pregnant, Cicero does not handle it well. He essentially leaves the table. He steps away from the table. He's not going to play by the rules of this game anymore. And it's something that he feels beat by. His family is the one thing that's more important to him than New Rome. And Caesar is not only going to take New Rome from him, he's going to take his family from him. And so, further underscoring Caesar's innocence and Cicero's desperation, Caesar is sitting in his fountainhead office, and Cicero comes and he's going to make an offer that any self-centered man could not refuse. He sits down opposite Caesar, and he takes an envelope out of his coat, and he says, in this red envelope is a confession, and this confession is signed by me, and it declares that you, Caesar, were prosecuted maliciously for your wife's death. That the preceding, and it admits that the proceedings were not justice, but they were for political purposes. And surely Caesar would have an easier time creating megalopolis if he had his name cleared, if he had that perfect reputation now where they say, see, my enemies tried to do this. Where that's why, you look at this and it's a perfect parallel for what happened with Trump over the summer, with how he was being persecuted as well, where a lot of times these political persecutions do not end up with the result the people who are so obsessed with them think that they're going to do, because they don't see how they're perceived from the outside. And Cicero, he almost knows that he's not putting everything on the line. He's putting his name on the line, but people sort of understood that there was a political prosecution going on there. And so, is he really giving up his entire life for this? Not 100%, but what he would be doing is he would be granting Caesar a clean slate. And so this would be one creation that he gives up in favor of a larger creation, where there are billions of fathers in the world, but there could be only Caesar Catalina who created megalopolis. And so that is what Cicero's really relying on here. And the choice is easy for Caesar, and the confession only exists for an audience of one. And what I'm really interested about, like the reason why I want an expanded story on that, is that maybe it happened and I missed it, but I don't know if Julia knew the overture that her father made. And I'd be so curious how she found out about that. If Caesar told her, or if Cicero told her, and how she reacted to it. I think they probably kept it man to man, but Caesar would have no reason. I mean, unless they could say like, oh, Angelina Jolie parental alienation type stuff going on there, but Caesar would have no other reason to keep it unless he truly was interested in, you know, the utopia life of that family altogether. And so that's an interesting thing that I'm going to look for on the second watch is, does Julia know her father made this offer? And with that envelope not taken, Cicero has his own existential crisis. And it's not like Caesar's, like, he doesn't go out on the town and, get drunk and do drugs and all that stuff. He is being literally like haunted in his dreams. Like, there's an image, and it's like this quietly stunning moment where Cicero has a nightmare where a hand from a cloud reaches out, grabs the moon, and then pulls it into the cloud. And like, even something as stable as the moon can be snatched away in Cicero's current state right now. Like, this is his spin out, is that even the moon isn't safe. That a hand can come out and take the moon away from him. Nothing is permanent. The hands of fate have their fingerprints on everything. And all I could think is that, like, it's almost like the type of imagery that Lynch would put in a film. Ideas arise. Ideas arrive like fish, and you need to pull the fish out of the sky. And if you let the fish swim away and you lose the idea, it's as bad. It'll drive you to suicide or whatever. Me doing an impression of Naomi Watts doing an impression of David Lynch. But, it's one of those scenes where you can remove it from the movie because it was like 15-second image, and then he wakes up and speaks to his wife about it, and there's like almost like a comedic element to it, and you can remove that image from the film. But then it's like one of those things of like, why did I go to the film if you removed the moon being pulled away by a hand that extends out from a cloud? Like, I showed up here to escape the world and to be put into your world. And I want to see things I've never seen before. And I've never seen that image. And I know some film buff is going to be like, actually, Coppola ripped this off from that movie where like the moon has a rocket stuck in his eye or whatever, like some 1930s shit that because people are finding all these things about the film that, all of the influences that are going into it. And I could have my own Andran soapbox here, but I'm going to not do that and just say I'm so glad that he kept those images in, because it's like an image that is going to be in my mind forever, where I can't remember if Julia knows that her dad handed over that envelope, but I'm never going to forget the moon being stolen. And so it's those Lynchian things, those Lynchian moments that just stick with you. And I love that it survived the final cut. But there's also this situation of, like, the fact that I want to know how Julia found out about the envelope. My main critique with this film is that the speed of the final act is almost a disservice. where we have hundreds of diagrams, montages of cities, real and artificial, and everything is pouring forward, and it's a feast of creativity, and we have 3 panes of activity, and, at the moment people are probably going to say this movie is incomprehensible, but it's comprehensible to the point where I want more context to comprehend more, because I know that each of these are puzzle pieces, and the more I look at them, the more I understand where they apply in the big picture. And the film shouldn't be belittled because your attention span is shot to the point that you're cooked. There are going to be people who trot out video essays of megalopolis, and it's easier to mock something that is giving you so much information that your little diarrhea brain can't understand, where you could just say it's incomprehensible. The final act doesn't stand up. It's just a collage of ideas. Because you didn't understand it doesn't mean that it's incomplete. I saw Megalopolis once, and I have over 2 hours of thoughts on it. Imagine when I see it a second time, how long this podcast could be. I'm writing this well into the night. There's probably going to be a security car that comes by and thinks I'm jacking off. I've been there that long. Not that I have that much stamina. I'm just saying that it's a long time to be there, and only a weirdo would stay that long. Jury's out on me here. But don't let the speed of this act confuse you into thinking that this is a failure. Because there are grand set pieces in this as well. The satellite falling from the sky, and the people's shadows dancing on buildings in a red glow, and a mountaintop speech, and a crisis, and a panic, and instability. And we're aware that there's not just one super city that could be built. There's not just one megalopolis that someone's working on. There's a Chinese megalopolis that could be going up too. And we're in another space race, and who knows what the Russians are up to when you look at them, and what is the path forward, and who builds the biggest megalopolis, and whose technology is superior, and which country will start sending their megalon to another location. And so we have all of this going, and then there needs to be roadblocks. Otherwise, Caesar gets his utopia and everyone else has to kiss the ring. There are too many too strong-willed characters for that to happen. So in this final act, while Platinum really comes into her own, this is, this Aubrey Plaza performance, if she gets a Best Supporting Actress nomination, where the nominations are looking really thin right now, and she's racially ambiguous, so she, if she knows any Spanish, she should just start speaking it. You know how what's that lady from Everything Everywhere All at Once, how you're man, she's getting better at English, and then you look where she was born and it's LA. She's literally just trolling you guys on all this stuff, but she trolled herself into an Oscar against one of the best female performances of the past decade. So if Aubrey Plaza really leans into this, only, speaks in a foreign language, she could easily get into the Best Supporting Actress race, because this Wow Platinum performance in the 4th act is bonkers in the best way. So here are some of her scenes. She's trying to get more influence over Crassus's entire empire, and she can't get it directly. He won't sign this over to her because she's, sort of a trophy wife figure. And so she tries to figure out, all right, I need to get power in this family. So I might have the chronology of these wrong, but these are all schemes by Wow. And so there's a great scene where she's in another gorgeous dress. Every single one of her outfits in this movie is incredible. She's in this gorgeous gray dress, and she's smoking a cig, essentially in front of a Bentley out in the snow. And she's doing it in a path that she knows that Caesar's always walking. And Caesar sees her, and he says, oh, it's, cold. Take my jacket. And he gives her the long overcoat that he's wearing. And Wow tries to rekindle everything. She tries to get everything back going there. And he essentially says, Well, I gotta be going on my way. Walks away from her, and Wow is so, infuriated by this. She drops the coat on the ground, gets into the Bentley, and then has the driver drive over the coat, like, as a very clear metaphor for what's going on there. And then she also deals with Julia, where she understands that Julia is the, you know, everything that WoW wants to be. That's what Julia is. I think the way that this happens is that she freezes Caesar's accounts. And I think because Caesar doesn't want to go see WoW, as an emissary, I think Julia goes there. And so she shows up at Crassius's opulent mansion, and Aubrey takes Julia to an old elevator, and they get in the elevator, and then while they're going up, Wow stops the elevator, and she's like, not only are the accounts all mine, not only is Crassius mine, but also Caesar is mine. You just don't know it yet. And so, like, she really alphas Julia. And now we come into how is she going to get those purse strings further. So I think maybe the portions that she has with Claudio come first, because I think that's how she ends up getting this controlling stake. The entire time she's working with Claudio is so fucking good. It's obviously one of the best parts of this movie. Like, I genuinely just want a Claudio and WoW Platinum, like, buddy comedy. It is so good, where she basically says, hey, that polycule mullet, that's gone. And to get him to cut his hair, WoW uses what any beautiful woman would do to exert power in a otherwise powerless situation. And so she becomes Claudio's dom. And Claudio wants power, but I think he wants power for situations like getting women like WoW Platinum. So he melts in her hands. He is, like, remember how we were talking about the booty? We were using our Joe Biden whisper where it's like, she's got the nicest booty, man. Look at it. Look at booty. She's not covering up her booty. So, like, how we were talking about the booty so much, Shia is transfixed by it. Like, later we're going to talk about how Aubrey is hypnotizing people. Like, Claudio, all he needs to be hypnotized by is like a girl in boy shorts, where that's what it takes to hypnotize Claudio. So while they're having their foreplay, she cuts his hair. While they're having her foreplay, she says, here's what you're going to do for me. You're going to go to Crassius in the steam room. You're going to get him to sign over his controlling interests because, he's currently compromised right now with a stroke. And while this is happening, visually, there's so much shadow motif, these shadow games. And it's like a Hammer horror film by the time they do get into that sauna, where Shia is going through everything that Aubrey is demanding, and Aubrey is like a witch, where she, straight out of a Hammer horror film, she is sort of transposed over it, her sinister energy, and it is so good. This entire time, she is Sharon Stoning like no one has Sharon Stoned since Sharon Stone. And so WoW succeeds in all this. I don't know why I sound like Kristen. Wow. But WoW succeeds in all of this witchy behavior. She's able to control everyone, it seems, except Caesar. And no one's able to control Caesar except Julia. And so I was really scared for Julia. I thought, you can't be the mayor's daughter and also carrying the most powerful man's child in the final act of this movie. And so it seems like everything is leading toward Julia being hurt. And so we watch Caesar move through New Rome, and we know all these machinations are working against him. And there's a scene that, I'm sure it's Coppola probably referencing a moment that happened in The Godfather as well, where, Fundy is driving Caesar and the car is stopped and a kid runs up to it. And I think the car is stopped because there's like an Uber in front of them, very mafia hit style, where like the Uber is in front of them and the guy doesn't speak English. And so he's arguing with Fundy. And while Caesar's left alone, a kid, approaches the car. And Caesar has this soft spot for children. He lost his child. And so now he probably sees his child in the eyes of every child. And so this child walks up and asks for his autograph, and Caesar does the usual, I'm an old guy banter type stuff, very of Coppola's time, where this is how grandparents sort of speak with grandkids, and it's all very lighthearted, and it really shows Caesar in a good light. And Caesar, sends the kid on his way with a well wish, and the kid raises up his hand and shoots Caesar in the face. And even with that setup with the Uber and like the Godfather history, that something is not right here. But the way Coppola shot it, I still jolted in my seat when that gun rang out, and I looked back and I wanted to see everyone else's reaction. It was a legitimate shock. Like, this was a master of what he does, doing what he does best. And so I love that. But it throws the film into peril as well, because he was shot point blank range in the face, Fundy rushes to save him and they pushes him in the back of the car, rushes him to the hospital. And then you see that his creation saves him, and not just his creation, because he also sees Julia there. That infatigable love is what, just the megalon wouldn't have saved him. And, this is more rubber science here, where basically the megalon is utilized to rebuild tissue, where it's a building block, just as you build a foundation, this is rebuilding bone and tissue in the face. And you either make this leap or you don't make this leap. I, of course, made this leap because I love this imagery, because it reminds me of Richard Kelly, where I will get back to Richard Kelly later on in my post-Empire section. But there's that trademark of the injured eye. Frank's eye in Donnie Darko from when Donnie stabs him with the knife. Or you have Sean William Scott's eye in Southland Tales. There's a motif, and there's something about the horrific nature of it, but then also the otherworldly glow of it. And film is about illusion, and this is just one of those illusions where Caesar, like a man-made weapon, rendered Caesar almost deceased. And then his own making and his own love is what brings him back. But it's not easy. You don't see, all right, now the megalon's on his face and let's just keep it moving. Caesar is broken by this. There are scenes of him just weeping, inconsolable. And who did this, because Wow didn't do it, where she's still in love with him. Crassus didn't do it because you think that he's incapacitated. And so that leaves Claudio. And the thing about Claudio is that Claudio has a right-hand man. And this right-hand man essentially is mostly following Shia's rules. But with Shia teaming up with Wow, this right-hand man was left to his own devices. And you know how the political persecution has a a real life allegory, but it was filmed before it happened. So like the Trump thing and Caesar being politically prosecuted, there's a parallel there. And then Caesar getting shot in the Trump assassination attempt, there's another parallel there. And Claudio even says exactly what happened in real life here, where like Claudio chastises his right-hand man and he's like, you idiot, you turned him into a martyr. And that's like the most powerful thing that a movement can have, is a martyr behind it. Like, I don't know how Che Guevara died, but he probably died a martyr because we make a ton of t-shirts of him. And so that's why it's like so dumb that ideologically possessed people are like, Claudio is Trump. Meanwhile, like Caesar's being persecuted politically. They're trying to take away all of his money and he got shot, where it's like, well, if you wanted to play that parallel, then I think you got another character there. But to make all those comparisons, like, I'm just saying that it sort of mirrors what happens in real life. I'm not saying this is like a one-for-one allegory. And that is the great thing about this movie, is that it took 30 years and hundreds of rewrites to be made. So if there were one-to-one political guys to say, this is the right guy, this is the left guy, this is the Antifa guy, this is the alt-right guy, all of that has no direct through line now, because it was rewritten so many times that Coppola probably forgot what each of those stand-ins were. And that's what makes the movie so good for me, is because I'm not on the left, I'm not on the right, I'm not going to vote in the election or something like that. So I don't want all of that stuff infecting my media. And I do find edification of when it parallels real life, but I also know that Coppola didn't somehow magically create a scene knowing what was going to happen to Trump in Pennsylvania. I like that the parallel can just be drawn because real life imitated the art there. And that, I don't know, makes it feel more alive to me. But if Caesar was Trump, or if Claudio was Trump, it would cheapen this movie so much, because it would make it such a product of the moment, where the reason why it's powerful is because it was a product of 2022, and 2024 we're seeing reflections of the current time right now in it, because it's not an ideologically possessed movie. It's a movie about hope, not about posturing who is going to deliver you that hope. There's a message where, you know, everything's an illusion, and the illusion that we're going for here is that we want to be hopeful for the future, and we want to look at creation as something that is going to bring us together. And that is beyond politics, and like both political parties will say that they're doing that. And so I love that Coppola didn't make a one-to-one there. And so like, even if you could say, oh, that there's a red hat in there, like he's sprinkling all this stuff in there, but you can't draw direct through lines through it. And so I think it's great. And when this happens to Caesar, it's such a shock, and it shakes everything up in the movie, and you really don't think that Caesar is going to continue on his path. But just as in real life, the show must go on, it goes on for Caesar, and he's not giving up against all of these forces that are up against him. Arguably, he's even stronger, because he knows that not only his material saved him, but his love saved him, and there's almost an invincibility that comes with that. And we've seen what I think is the lowest of our hero in that Madison Square Garden spin out. And so even though this is a low, even though he shows up to wow like a blubbering idiot crying that his accounts are frozen, it still doesn't feel like the lowest, because of how much he has in his corner now. And so when he goes to WoW, and when he tries to get his accounts unfrozen, she tries to hypnotize him. And I don't know if the necklace that she's trying to do the hypnotizing with is made of megalon or if it's some sort of other material that she has put together, because they're like these images of like her face in water that I wasn't sure if maybe she was like performing a spell, an incantation or something like that. I don't really mess with witchcraft because, you know, the Pope recently said, let's find the tweet. The Pope said, "Our secular world is teeming with magicians, occultism, spiritism, astrologers, and satanic sects. If we... It's sex, like S-E-C-T-S, not satanic sex. Like, there is what you could almost see as satanic sex based on how it's shot in this film. But let's quote the Pope here. Let's not be naughty. Our secular world is teeming with magicians, occultism, spiritism, astrologers, and satanic sects. If we kick the devil out the door, he tries to return through the window. If we overcome him with faith, he seeks to return through superstition." And by the way, I deleted CoStar, so if we are friends on that and you aren't like, oh, you haven't sent me my astrology lately, you haven't sent our, you know, CoStar matches lately, and that's because I deleted it because the Pope told me I had to, because otherwise it was a backdoor. But you know, all of this to say, I hope that you're okay. But WoW can't win. You know, she can't win with these dark arts. Her demonology will end poorly. And even when she tries to do this hypnotizing, she's interrupted. She can't complete her spell. And so, does WoW get her comeuppance? She absolutely does. In one of the most, I would say, discussed scenes in this movie, the hostile takeover is like almost complete. And WoW shows up in, oh, this is the type of outfit where you just say, wow, you Christopher Walken, wow. You know, like when she walks in with this Cleopatra bustier type thing, and Crassus is in his sickbed. And when you see this WoW outfit, he has a WoW reaction in the form of a tenting boner. And Claudio is also there to bear witness to the tenting boner. But Crassus, you know, he's had a stroke, and so you can say like, oh, senile old man, he's not all there. And it's his wife, you know, WoW is his wife, so that's a natural reaction to it. And he looks ready to film a tape that you won't have to deep fake this one. You know, when Claudio gets his USB drive of it, there'll be no need to fake anything there because Crassus is ready to go. But when those covers are thrown off to begin the unveiling, we see that the tent was actually made by a bow and arrow. And Crassus reveals he did not have a stroke. He was doing his own scheming. He understood that he was being taken advantage of, and he had to root out the rats. And so once he knew that WoW was stealing from him, he lifts that bow and arrow, pulls back the arrow, and shoots her right through the chest. And I mourned this. I was like, no, WoW. Because I loved her. I would watch an entire WoW Platinum movie. Like, you know how Zack Snyder just gets like infinite money from Netflix and like they make spin-off movies of like his Dawn of the Dead in Vegas, and then there's like a safe cracking movie or whatever. Like, just give me the Claudio and WoW Platinum movie. Give an extra $15 million. We don't need a lot of money for it. We just need those cool camera tricks and them scheming and Shia and Aubrey and all of its glory, because WoW is dead. So we need to do a prequel. And Claudio gets shot in the ass twice with some arrows. Caesar had that, you know, the true martyr getting shot, and then Claudio has the humiliating clown getting shot. And as Claudio is tending to his butt we also see that Caesar's face is getting better. The megalon worked. It actually is healing him. And that once sniveling guy, now Wow has been eliminated. Claudio's been pushed to the side. The money can come back in. And Megalopolis needs one more catalyst. And that catalyst is in the form of the Chinese satellite, where we've seen this satellite above Earth, and it comes crashing down into New Rome. And this causes chaos because there's a situation where a city can almost be against itself, where they can say, we don't have adequate housing, food prices are too high, and you're sort of like angry against your own government. When a secondary government comes in here, and even Coppola does use some footage of 9/11 here, when this satellite comes down and you don't know if you're being attacked and you don't know what's going on, and everyone in the city is terrified that this is an invasion or something, this is when people look to a leader. And Caesar is now repaired. He now has his money, and now there's a foreign threat at his doorstep. And so people are willing to come together like they did after 9/11, in almost like a George Washington type speech, or like a Gettysburg Address. Caesar speaks to all of the people. He speaks to the masses, where Claudio had been controlling the masses before. That was his way to get to power. This time, they're looking for a leader with a plan. Claudio is a chaos agent. He is not a leader with a plan. He's a guy who will stand on top of a stump that's cut into a Nazi sign. This is a guy who's standing on top of a mountain, and Megalon is like projecting his face out to these people, and he is giving them a future through creation. He is promising them something more, and he is promising them a new safety. And so with that, with Caesar at the height of his powers after this assassination attempt, we barrel towards the end. And I think just on vibes alone, people thought we were barreling toward a tragedy, where that foreign influence would swoop in and attack New Rome. Like, that Chinese satellite is so ominous, and Caesar's ambition is so large, and the damage he's taken while trying to make his fantasy a reality has fractured him physically and mentally, and he'll realize that even if he does build New Rome, it could be destroyed by outsiders, and the dreamer is dreamed too big, and he was blinded by his own hubris that shielded him from realities of his impossible desires. And I mean, does that sound familiar? Is there a little metatextual commentary going on here? If there is, that tragedy cannot happen. And so that's what I was thinking, is that this is Francis talking about his experience to bring this to the screen. So we're not going to see that tragedy I thought would happen. Just as the fake love of WoW Platinum is exposed, the power of real love has allowed Caesar to reclaim his footing. And it's like, this is the moment that it all comes together for me. And this, honestly, it could have been the final scene in the movie for me, and I probably would have been satisfied. Because remember that clock that Caesar and Julia would stand on and look out at the city and imagine what Megalopolis is? Well, now there are beams suspended around this clock. Now there is building that is happening. And on one of those beams, far away from that clock, we see Caesar. And he's high above the city, and peril is awaiting him in one slip. And instead of being all alone at such great heights, he's joined by Julia. She takes off her shoes. She walks onto the beams in the same path that Caesar walked to get to that far beam. And her design is clear. She knows exactly how to continue building. She's helped to build back better after the assassination attempt. And so she asks him to stop time. And Caesar, with his head in his hands, wails, "Now Time, stop. And then he looks away from Julia out to the smoke-filled city as it moves along just as it always has. We hear the tick of the massive clock. He did not stop time. Time continues on. And Julia continues on, forward. She has a flower in one hand, and her other hand extends out to Caesar. And she requests, "Do it for me." And Caesar hesitates. And Julia, in the sweetest voice, prompts him, "Try." At this point, Caesar is literally hanging on the ropes, and he looks to Julia like an impotent man unable to consummate their love. And she adds a qualifier to her request. And she says, "Stop time. For me." And her hand is still extended when she does this. "Try it," she requests. And Adam lets go of the ropes, and he turns to her, and he takes her hand. Her gaze never leaves him this entire time. She is looking up at him admiringly and knowingly and with utter belief that he can do this. She looks at him with like support and expectation. She's on the edge of this beam, and all that exists to her is him. Her worries are uniformly with her love. And Caesar tries it. He begins. He says something like, "Oh, hear me time for Julia." But he loses his words, and Julia continues being there completely. And in that sweet voice again, she asks, "Try." And Driver, in this moment, instead of, screaming out this command, almost like as a mumble, he said, "Hear me, time, stop now." And then it does. The clouds cease to move and the cars cease to drive, and Julia's beautiful green dress continues to flutter in the wind where, I'm not sure why the wind didn't stop as well, but, I just like that because Julia is so unaffected by this time stop while being so affected by the fact that he's done it again. They held hands together and she restored him. He did it because of her. And Caesar, he looks around in awe, and she says, "You seem to have done it." And when she does, she chokes on a sob. And Caesar nods and he accepts this, and he gets down from the beam and he kisses Julia, and she arches forward, and it's in this dangerous move, but it's made so gracefully, and she drops her flowers because she has him now. She doesn't need the flowers anymore, and the flowers hang suspended, stopped in time. And this is my favorite scene in the movie. It's gorgeous. It perfectly illustrates the careful balance for work and love and existing in a precarious world. And if you're going to collaborate with someone, you need them to believe that you still have that power, that you still can stop time. Even when you don't believe it, and even when you're humiliated by the fact that you can't stop time. They always say that LA is a city where a creative could die from encouragement. But megalopolis is a city where encouragement could save your life. And so with Julia's belief and with Julia's love, Caesar's power returns, and so does his inspiration, and so does Coppola's inspiration, and everything blasts forward. There's two paths that we see here. Where New Rome, at its lowest, down on the streets, Claudio has lost control of this crowd because high up in the sky, Caesar is building the palace of the future. And so, like, once again, just like we had the riots in Madison Square Garden when they thought that Vesta had filmed that sex tape with Caesar, now there are riots down on the street because Claudio lost control of his mob. And, like, you know, I'm disgusted by rioters, and I love Shia LaBeouf, so if I was in Shia's militia, it wouldn't have gone down like it did. There would have been a lot of blood in New Rome streets, and then me saying, okay, Claudio, we're going to get you to Megalopolis safely. Don't worry. And so Shia and his Claudio, he meets his end like Mussolini at the hands of his own people. And, like, I know the dumbest human beings in society, like Robert De Niro, are going to be like, Claudio was mega. That's how we need to treat fascism in this country. But, like, anyone who's so ideologically possessed that's saying Claudio is mega, like, you don't understand that guy's supporters at all. Like, there's no situation where it ends like Mussolini, where they'll throw him a parade before they hang him upside down. Like, Trump's base is so sycophantic that, like, even the most delusional resistance libs don't believe that his own people would take him down. That would be the same behavior as, like, what the deep state tried to do. So why would his supporters do that? You can't say that Claudio is Trump because of all these rewrites or because he's intentionally, like, hiding the ball. And I think it's awesome. And it's not totally outside of how a leader like Claudio would end up. Like, there is that Mussolini parallel, and there's, like, a explanation where there are a lot of scenes in this movie that people seem to be saying are pointless, but do have a point if you're looking. And there's one scene where Claudio is marching to meet Wow Platinum, and he drops his hat. He turns to the right-hand man who did the failed assassination attempt, and he says, pick that up. And the right-hand man throws his hat on the ground and then tells the guy behind him, pick that up. And then the guy behind him throws his hat on the ground and tells the guy behind him, pick that up. And that's the type of leadership that Claudio is capable of, is that, like, everyone who follows him is trying to be him, but also trying to step on the guy before him. And at some point, you just reach the bottom where there's no one left to pick up your hat. And then the guy who has to pick up the hat stabs the guy in front of him in the back. You know, the guy who has no hat to pick up picks up a rope and starts going for the guy at the head of the line and says he started it. And so while they're raising hell in the streets, Caesar is raising a city. And he's not doing this through, like, dialogue like, you, go over there, get that, you need to do this, you need to do that, where, like, people are so accustomed to TV where they need to see characters giving directives, and then they need to see, like, they want anytime you're building something, they want to see it, like, created like a Lego house. But film is an illusion. Coppola is always saying this. And so our illusion is this city is built through images and through moments and through holidays. And, like, this is the medium of film. You could put this into a novel and you would have to describe all of this stuff. He doesn't have to describe this stuff. He can show this stuff. Like, Fritz Lang has the visuals. Like, the visuals are why Metropolis still exists at this point. And so Coppola is not going to give you exposition where Metropolis did it better 100 years ago. And through the exposition in Metropolis, they ran into the Tower of Babel situation. And if Francis brought in the Tower of Babel situation into the creation of Megalopolis, he would be undermining his ultimate thesis at the end here. It would be over-explaining to the point that it would make things weaker. And so that's why I love that he did it visually, is because you don't have to have the Tower of Babel arguments, things like that. Megalopolis gets built. you can reach it by train. Like, we know this because Cicero, with his wife and his grandchild, they leave the new Rome that once was, and they enter the megalopolis that now is. And Cicero gets off the train, and his wife gets on this futuristic sort of conveyor belty rainbow road. Gold, the streets are paved with gold here. And he does it to say goodbye to his wife, but she refuses that goodbye. Like, sometimes our fear of the future can be conquered by an extended hand. Julia extended out her hand when her man was on the beam and he thought his powers were all but gone. And now Julia's mother extends out her hand as she's riding along on a beam of light. And she says, you can be with your family in this new place. You don't have to hold this grudge. And just as Caesar finally moved past Sunny Hope and, never forgot her, but didn't allow it to crush him, Cicero is allowed to leave New Rome for Megalopolis because he does have that family waiting for him at the end there. And so Cicero takes his wife's hand, just as Caesar took Cicero's daughter's hand, and it reinvigorates him, just as Julia's touch reinvigorated Caesar. And Cicero arrives to his family. His wife is there, his daughter is there, his son-in-law is there, and his grandchild is there. And they're celebrating. And there is no discord in the streets. Megalopolis has changed things for people because they moved forward, not with Claudio's way, throwing your hat down and having someone else pick it up, and not with Cicero's way of things can't get better, we just need to maintain the status quo. There was creation that everyone was involved in, and they gave birth to Megalopolis. And now, what's to be done? You celebrate, and then what? You stand in a city that you originally thought was to satisfy someone's ego, and you come to understand that it's to satisfy all of us. Through hard work and dedication and love, each member of this family got onto that stage for that celebration. And when they leave this earth, we see Cicero age throughout this film where eventually he's walking with the cane. And I talked about how I called my parents after I saw Cicero's wife because of how old she looks, where they're going to leave this world, and they can leave this world in the confidence that they left it better than they found it. And if they never left doing what they were doing in New Rome, maybe they would have only left the world as they had found it. But now they've left it better. And that's important because on that stage, the center point is not Caesar who created this city. And it isn't almost the entire family. It focuses on their child, on Caesar and Julia's child. And so when Caesar, one final time, stops time, everything freezes except for his child. And that child will go on trying to survive in a city that is much better than the city that his father had to survive in. And even as the time is stopped and the credits roll and Megalopolis is done as a film, everyone who walks out there understands that they're powerless to stop time. We don't have that superpower, and so it's entirely up to you how you choose to spend your time, how you choose to build a better world. And so when you see people talking about how this film is a failure, that's how they've chosen to spend their time. That is Francis Ford Coppola's Megalopolis. And now for the post-Empire postscript. This is something that I wanted to tack on the end here because I am one of the few novelists who describe their work as post-Empire fiction. And if you're totally unfamiliar on that, I'd point you to the Daily Beast piece that Bret Easton Ellis wrote about post-Empire. He even mentioned things about this movie where he said, an Empire movie is The Godfather. And he said, post-Empire is Shia LaBeouf. And so when I came into this movie, I did not know if I was going to get an Empire Francis Ford Coppola who made The Godfather, where, you know, if you wanted to do that again, The Godfather is about the immigrant experience in America. It's a once upon a time in America fable that allows us to romanticize the immigrant experience in America. But in a post-Empire world, immigration has changed so much that if you were to tell that fable, part of it would be about having your community pumped so full of people that were brought with the expressed intent to create a mono-party. Like, the party who tells you democracy is in peril is not lying to you. They're actually using this classic American tale, and they're bastardizing it into something that has solutions that you can no longer speak about in post-Empire America. You can't tell that story in post-Empire America. If you tell that story in a post-Empire world, you know who you have to make the heroes and you know who you have to make the bad guys. Like, in Megalopolis, all those mobs of like unwashed chaos agents that are like green screened in, they don't matter. But in a post-Empire world, the mobs of unwashed masses are like, oh, you precious little baby, you are the best of us. Thank you for fighting for our freedoms. Like, all of 2020 was us saying, like, here's the rules for everyone, unless you're a protester, and then you're a magical little angel and you can do whatever you want. There are no rules at all, and we'll reform bail to make sure that they don't happen. Like, you know, post-Empire America is dystopian in this regard. Like, we have to treat everyone like a precious little baby who's fighting the good fight and should be celebrated, unless they're mobbing for the opposite political reason of us. Then we have to incarcerate them like a third world country. But Megalopolis doesn't take that post-Empire route. It rejects that. And it rejects the demands of cinema. Like, there could be a very simple 3-act structure that would make everyone very happy. But you don't build a city on a 3-act structure. You do if you want to make a lot of money, but if you want to make art, you don't. You build it on history, and you build it on your vision of the future. But these types of stories don't get told in post-Empire America unless you self-fund them, which is exactly what Coppola did. And because he self-funded them, he was also able to cast in ways that post-Empire America does not allow you to cast. Like, post-Empire legend Shia LaBeouf being in this film, spending so much of its time in drag and being a character that you aren't supposed to root for, is a broken rule. Like, our perfect gender dysphoric Shia is supposed to be able to skip through this film and show all the stick in the mud old men what the new life is really about. Or that they had to make him into a Trump surrogate, and then, like, you could say, oh, you know, he could never build a world that people could live in, and then that would satisfy those people. But the gender goblins or the DSAs don't get any play in this movie. They aren't a consideration at all. Like, the protesters during the Vesta Sweetwater performance, they're seen as clowns, just like the mimes. There's a parallel where there's a group of mimes and a group of protesters, and they're both lined up in the stadium, you know, and framed in a similar way. And in this post-Empire world of Megalopolis, like, our flawless genderqueer hero Shia would have to be a counterpoint to Caesar. But that doesn't happen at all either, where Caesar is totally disconnected from the culture war, where they had to find ways to attack him, where, like, they deep faked him to pull him into their world because he's so detached. And like when he's with WoW and the TV's playing, his back is to the TV and he's not exactly engaged with WoW either, where he's totally shut off from the Twitter entertainment cycle, all that stuff. So it makes him someone you also can't do an Elon Musk parallel with, where Elon is so terminally online that he cannot be Caesar because he's always worried about perception. He's always putting up Twitter polls. He's always, accept me, accept me, accept me. And I'm also a naughty little guy. Caesar does none of that. And so it's great that we don't have to, the Tony Stark, Elon Musk thing doesn't have to be applied to him at all. And we can have a more Rourke-like protagonist. And he handled the post-Empire deepfake thing really well as well, where I went into it with Taylor, or, there's a ad that's going around right now where, it's like a truthful politician ad where they'll deepfake the voice of the politician actually saying what their positions are instead of, that happy little commercial that happens. And people are like horrified by that. But the positions it's saying are the actual positions of the politicians. It's just they're actually saying them instead of dancing around them. And so Coppola handled the deepfake stuff really well, where it's water off the back. Like, what is the most impactful deepfake you've seen so far? I mean, odds are we don't know what it is because it was so impactful we didn't know it was fake. But the second most impactful then, like, is a naked Taylor Swift at Arrowhead Stadium with, like, red body paint on. That is the second most impactful deepfake. And that makes no impact on the world at large. So Coppola, in a post-Empire way, figured out that deepfake thing as well, where, like, Vesta was fake naked and then she was really naked 30 seconds later. She did it to herself, though. She almost conjured the deepfake into reality. And because all these post-Empire rules were broken, the post-Empire media handled it exactly how they did. Like, Coppola had to be punished. Headlines of negative press were just churned out before audiences even had a chance to see the film. And the notion was, if he succeeded in this, what if Spielberg doesn't need us anymore? What if Spielberg is self-funding these films and he's going to take the hit if he loses? If you lose Spielberg and now you don't have one of your most reliable craftsmen, like, even though West Side Story did bomb and The Fabelmans, I mean, I thought was abjectly terrible except for the David Lynch scene, but people enjoyed it. Like, I mean, I'm not sure if I've ranted about Michelle Williams with her manic pixie nightmare mom. I'm sure I have, because that is, like, I would rather watch Terrifier 3 than Michelle Williams doing Steven Spielberg's mom. But anyways, if Spielberg was able to self-fund those films, the industry would only be left with the Russo brothers, and they would have to only do their IP films, and so much of it is pulled away. Like, if Greta Gerwig could fund her own films with her and Noah Baumbach as the 1-2 punch, like, Hollywood is going to have to find someone else to make a Barbie movie, which they can't because Barbie came out, like 2 years ago, and there are no other Mattel movies because no one else can crack it besides someone like Greta. Like, cinema could be overtaken with different viewpoints. And that's why Sound of Freedom was so scary to these people as well. That's why it was only negative coverage of that film. Like, empathy can be generated from the other side because cinema is an empathy machine. And so if they don't control this machine, you can start making empathy for the people that you're enemies with. Like, we need to write a narrative of a car crash before the keys are even in the ignition on a lot of this stuff. That's how the press looks at it. Like, those who never build will gleefully declare when something fails. They're already doing it with Joker 2. Joker 2 hasn't even gone out on the screen yet, and they're already saying that the post-tracking is like Morbius or whatever. They're already building the narrative of that failing because Todd is going to try something new on it. You know that he's not going to make Joker 2 where like Joker eventually meets Batman. He's probably going to kill the Joker, like we said. And that's not going to make cinema goers happy. And so looking forward scares people because in post-Empire America, looking backward is what it's all about. Looking forward, the unwashed masses have to have a plan. They have to figure out what's next. If they look back, they can always just be that little child that mommy and daddy made sure everything was okay for, and they would sit there with their little juice box and watch their little Mega Man or whatever, and everything will be fine. Like, they're in the shadow of once greatness, so if they look towards the future, they can only extrapolate horrors. And so when you look to the future in Megalopolis, and you do see some horrors, but you see them bypassed for great accomplishment, they can't relate to that. They only know the future is a horror, everything's dystopian. You know, like those handmaiden people were like still showing up where it's like, come on, guys. None of you have read the book, and you're showing up there on like courthouse steps like dressed like a handmaiden. Like, they want the dystopia, and so the nostalgia is exactly how they escape. And Megalopolis is a film that spits in the face of nostalgia, and that's not popular with the MAGA crowd because Make America Great Again is a nostalgic phrase by its very nature. We're going to make America great again. So we're going back to what it once was. And you can't really pick the time that occurred. You can't say, oh, we're going in a time machine back to 1962 because they're like dogs attacking people. And then on the left, the nostalgia is all, I'm going to be the little boy. I'm going to be the little boy. Nothing can hurt the little boy. I'm going to put on my little graphic tee and I'm going to go in my little room that is filled with Funko Pops and I'm going to stream my reactions to a video game, you know, like, and your child is just waiting outside in the living room eating out of a package of bologna because you haven't become the parent that you need to. Like, if you had to look at a villain that wasn't like Claudio and wasn't Cicero in Megalopolis, the villain is nostalgia. Like, the thing that is pulling our protagonist back is he's looking at his dead wife. You know, he wants his wife back. He wants to be sitting there braiding her hair and everything. Nostalgia is keeping him from creating. And even the violence pushed him forward instead of having him retreat to be Lil Baby, instead of him being weighted hand and foot by mommy girlfriend, instead of saying, all right, you'll be my trad wife and we're already rich and you'll just stay at home and you'll take care of me. The violence pushed him forward, and people don't like that. They want it to be a punishment. They want him to die because of the gun violence instead of the violence being a projection forward, that his time is so limited that it was robbed from him, that it all could have been over, that any moment that clock can stop ticking on top of that tower, and it's not because he stopped time, it's because some kid with a gun stopped his time. And so, is this like a message movie? I think it is, but not in the post-Empire message movie way where it needs to be like Get Out or something like that, where we're all on the same side. Like, no one is on the other side of Get Out. Where with Megalopolis, when someone buys this DVD, it's not going to make the world a better place, but the drive that Coppola made Megalopolis with is so remarkable in that his AD on the film was his son Roman, and his sister has a great role in the film. And Francis's daughter Sophia is one of the most important female filmmakers to ever live, and her daughter appears in this film as one of the first starring roles. And all of this culminates where it's a family affair, minus Nick Cage, And you see that baby at the end, and you understand that Francis did build his megalopolis, and he did build a better future for all of his family. When people see what Roman did as the AD, as the second unit director, then they're going to want to approach him on things, because you can't say that this is an unimaginative film. And if you see Romy, then you'll be someone like me who will maybe check out the EP and you'll listen to it, and you'll, from a distance, it'll become your anthem, and you'll drink 10 beers and scream sing it all day long. So he's built this world where I reviewed his daughter before I ever reviewed him. And even when the credits roll, you see a tribute to his wife, may she rest in peace. And she contributed to his overall world as well, where she had that incredible Apocalypse Now documentary. And we'll be getting another documentary on Megalopolis. Mike Figgis was there. So we don't need those variety reports. Mike Figgis is going to show us this set here. And that's post-Empire in a way, too, where his wife created the post-Empire idea of a documentary about your husband filming a movie, but then the post-Empire idea of there's so much more of this world to explore, and so if we can see how he built his megalopolis, that is a Caesarian moment. Like the idea, we're going to get more footage of Shia. We're going to hear Shia talk. You could charge me $16 right now, and I will drive to the West Orange AMC to watch that movie. And in another post-Empire way, more story will be told because there's a graphic novel coming out. And after the graphic novel, there's a fiction novel coming out. And the author of that fiction novel is Colleen McCullough. And if you're familiar with her work, her massive tomes about Rome, you will say, but Tommy, she died a decade ago. And you would be 100% right. She's been dead for a decade. So this must mean that she completed her novel no later than 2015. But so much of Megalopolis was created on set. So one has to imagine that the novel that she created will have some inconsistencies with the final film. And this brings me to my Caesarian pitch. So if you're listening to this, one of the ways you could have discovered me is that I wrote the novelization for Richard Kelly's Southland Tales. And if you had to do a double feature, and you did Southland Tales and then needed to pick a second movie, you would not be wrong to pick Megalopolis. And what I did when I novelized Southland Tales is there's an entire world that didn't appear in the theatrical cut. So what I used for my building blocks is I had Richard's prequel script, I had the graphic novels that he created, I had the can cut of the film, and I had the final theatrical Blu-ray. And I took all of that information and put it into one novel. And that is what I would like to do with Megalopolis for free. It costs you $0. Richard Kelly did not pay me a cent to do that novelization. And so, I still get emails from people who tell me that my prose clarified Richard's work for them, and when they watch the film now, it feels so much more complete than it ever did before. And I want to create that backstory with Megalopolis. So if you know Francis Ford Coppola, and if he's willing to do a second novel on Megalopolis, I am the person to do it. So there is a city that I'm desperately trying to expand, and all I need is a license for the patent for Megalon. With that, hear me now. Podcast, stop.